Copyright Web Novel Chapter 1, Chapter 1 Beginning. All I saw was emptiness. Wherever he looked, all he saw was darkness. He did not remember how he had reached this state. I no longer had a body, I was just a floating flame. I tried to remember who I was, my tastes and my family, but the more time passed, the blurrier everything became, like sand slipping through fingers. I didn't know how much time had passed, but something happened. Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled and dragged. It was a terrifying sensation, even without a body. I felt as if I was being molded and structured into something new. Fear was the only thing that filled my mind for what seemed like hours. When I regained some control, I felt it, a weak body, but mine nonetheless. For a while I noticed how I grew and developed more senses, which led me to realize that I was in the womb of who is now my mother. As the months went by, touch developed, which made me realize that I was about to be born. Underscore 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 on 1977, Hogsmeade was covered in snow, like a postcard frozen in time. This year's winter was creeping through the cracks in the windows and between the bones of the unsuspecting. The streets were nearly empty, save for hooded figures slipping into the shadows, seeking warmth or silence. He walked casually. He was tall, thin as a knife, the cloak wrapped around him seemed an extension of himself. No one dared to stop him. No one looked directly at him. No one, except one person. "My lord," said a firm but unexpected voice. He stopped. In front of him, a young woman. No more than 20, fair face, dark eyes, hair matted by wind and snow. "You know who I am," he murmured, without turning around at all. "I know enough," she replied, "and I know that no one else would dare speak to you." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the icy whistle of the wind. "You're either brave," he said at last, "or very stupid." "Isn't it the same thing?" she asked. He turned and, for the first time, stared at her. Elaine Harper was her name. A dirty blood, a Ravenclaw student, the daughter of a Muggle librarian and an elementary school teacher. She had nothing to offer him. No bloodline, no legacy. Just intense, wild, almost primal magic. A magic that seemed to have been born without a mold. And for a reason he still didn't understand, he didn't kill her. For weeks they met in secret. She talked. He listened. She would talk to him about books, about ideas, about what the world could be if it stopped dividing into clean bloods and dirty bloods. He didn't argue. He just watched. Elaine's magic slipped through his fingers, uncontainable. He studied it. He tested it. He thought about using it, and maybe he did. But with each encounter, something slipped through her fingers, control. One night, in an old forgotten house near the Forest of Dean, she watched him for some time. "You're not what they think you are," she said. "And you don't know what you're saying," he replied coolly. "I do know. But I still believe it." That night he left without saying goodbye. The spring of 1978 brought more than flowers. Elaine was pregnant. She didn't tell him. She didn't have to. He knew. He felt it. Something in his essence had changed. By the time he confronted it, it was too late. "I don't want you to want me," she told him, through tears, "I just want you to know that I'm going to have it. With or without you." He did not answer. His gaze turned to stone as he looked at her. He spun on his heel and disappeared into the shadows, as if he had never been there. Elaine never saw him again. July came with storms. The cabin was protected by rudimentary enchantments, just enough to keep it hidden. Elaine's magic had begun to wear thin. Her body was young, but already broken inside. When the contractions started, there was no one else. No healers, no friends. Just her, the rain pounding on the roof and a pain that snapped her like dry twigs. She tried to help herself with simple spells, but the words came out choppy, her wand trembled and the blood began to flow too fast. The labor was long, agonizing. And then, at last, a cry. A baby boy. Pale, thin, with dark eyes that shone in the moonlight. But in his gaze, even as a newborn, there was something old. As if the soul that inhabited that body had already lived too long. Elaine held him with both hands, her body trembling with spasms. He was bleeding uncontrollably, barely conscious. She pulled him close to her chest with what little strength she had left. "You shall be called Aurelian Riddle," he whispered. "You will bear his last name. Not because he deserves it, but because you will transform it into something noteworthy." The child opened his eyes for the first time. His crying stopped. Elaine smiled, broken. "You are more than him, more than me." Her fingers loosened. The head fell to the side and so Elaine Harper died. Minutes earlier, from one moment to the next I felt something pushing me. It was different from anything I had experienced before, not more painful, just different. Being born is not a pleasant thing to feel. During my stay in the womb I managed to connect with memories that were distant to me before. My hypothesis was simple: without a brain there is no way to connect with them. I realized what I was like. I had a family I cherished, parents and a brother 2 years younger. I liked to watch anime and read in my free time, and by all accounts I was not someone who was considered sociable, so I spent most of my time at home. I lived until I was 17 when a car accident on a school trip ended my life. Ironic? No, I barely left the house, to end up dying this way. My last memories of that life were filled with regrets and unfulfilled desires. Returning to my birth I felt how the wind crashed against my body, causing me to scream. I tried to open my eyes but I could not find the strength to do it. Then I felt how some hands embraced me. They were comforting and full of feelings. I knew that this person was my new mother. Then I heard some words that shook me internally. "You'll be called Aurelian Riddle." Inside I thought of the possibilities of being the son of a bald man with no nose. The next thing I heard confirmed my assumptions: "You will bear his last name. Not because he deserves it, but because you will transform it into something noteworthy." I cursed my luck. Being the son of a narcissistic murderer is not the best starting point. The next second I opened my eyes only to observe how life left my mother's body. Before she passed away she smiled at me. "You are more than him. More than me." After her last words she died. I felt something or someone approaching me. It wasn't very tall, from my perspective. The moment he lifted me up, he pointed a finger at me, emitting a light that I assumed was a spell that plunged me into a deep sleep. In my last lucid moments, I hoped that this person had nothing to do with my father. Somewhere in the north. He knew it. Not by letters. Not by spies. Not by words. He felt it. Like a vibration in the magic. A crack inside him. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't guilt. It was something else. He said to himself she died for her decision. For believing in me, for believing in something that doesn't exist. I wasn't supposed to care. But for an instant, I felt the world tilting. Not because of his death, but because of what her left behind. He did not leave. He didn't bury her. He didn't look at his son. A week later, under a rainy night, a hooded figure glided through the damp streets of London. In front of the gate of the San Americo orphanage, a woven basket was carefully placed. Inside, a baby covered with an enchanted blanket embroidered with a blue flower and a double initial, AR. No one saw the face of the one who abandoned him. No one heard footsteps. Only the slight creak of the wood as the door closed. The next morning, a woman with a kind face found him. She took him in her arms and read the anonymous note sewn on the edge of the blanket. "His name is Aurelian Riddle. Take care of him and give him another story." Chapter 2. Chapter 2. A life worth living. The San Americo orphanage had the faded charm of places that were once cared for but had long since been forgotten. At first glance, it looked like an abandoned building, bricks worn down by rain, window frames rotted through, and an iron gate that groaned each time someone entered or left. There were no vibrant colors, no well-kept gardens. Inside, it smelled of saltless soup, damp clothes, and old dust. A place where time seemed frozen, trapped between old books and creaking beds, thin blankets, and nights filled with the sighs of children learning to fall asleep without anyone to say good night. Aurelian had never been a crybaby, nor a loud or aggressive child. He was just another boy. Pale, quiet, dark-eyed and soft-spoken. Observant. Always on the edges, but never truly isolated. He didn't get into trouble, didn't mock others, didn't stand out in any particular way. He played when invited, ate in silence, and smiled politely if someone spoke to him. To everyone else, he was simply Aurelian. But long before he could walk, Aurelian remembered another life. A different bed. A family that no longer existed. A love for stories, books, and anime that had once comforted him in his childhood. Above all, he remembered having been a frustrated, introverted teenager whose dreams had died in a ridiculous accident. Then came darkness until Elaine, his mother. Her first and last smile in this life. She had died bringing him into the world. Aurelian remembered the warmth of her skin, the tremble of her hands, the barely audible words that sealed his name: "Your name will be Aurelian Riddle. You will become someone worth remembering." Aurelian hadn't cried. He didn't know how. Even as a newborn, something inside him was too old to break. It was as if grief arrived in layers, too complex to fall all at once. That name was both a wound and a promise. To be the son of Voldemort in the Harry Potter universe was a cruel irony. As a child in his previous life, he had dreamed of living in this world. He'd wanted to attend Hogwarts, fly on a broomstick, cast spells. Now he had the chance. But not as a hero. Not even as a spectator. As the descendant of the most feared man of all. Then I'll rewrite the script, he promised himself one day, facing the cracked mirror in the second-floor bathroom. I want to live a life worth living. A life where I'm free and can enjoy everything it has to offer and more. He was shy by nature. Speaking in groups was difficult. He didn't like to be touched without permission, or forced into loud games. But he wasn't hostile. If a kid invited him to play hide and seek, he said yes. If someone needed help with homework, he offered it. The others knew him as the weird kid who reads or the one who stays quiet even when everyone else is screaming. Underscore 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 underscore. By the age of 2.5, he began to notice patterns that didn't fit normalcy, just like in the books. The first time an object moved at his will, he was in the kitchen. He was tired of always eating cold soup. In a moment of silent frustration, the bowl heated up, not boiling, but noticeably warmer. No one noticed but him. It kept happening. Spoons trembled when he was anxious, lamps flickered with his emotions, a flower leaned toward him without wind, a leaf slowly spun across the floor for no reason. Once, when he had a fever, the water in his cup began to boil without anyone touching it. He understood. It was accidental magic. And he was no ordinary child. He had lived before. Inspired by Rudius Grere, the protagonist of Mushoku Tensei, he adapted that method to his own path, training his magic with no external support. No branches. No pretend wands. His body was the channel. His mind, the engine. His soul, the catalyst. Aurelian couldn't cast visible spells, but he could develop magical sensitivity. And that's exactly what he cultivated. Each morning, before sunrise, he would sneak into the orphanage's old abandoned chapel. In silence, he sat cross-legged and began his practices. Visualization, he imagined streams of energy moving within him. At first, it was just a warm light along his spine. Later, branching paths extending to his limbs. Emotional control, he realized magic intensified with emotion. He learned to provoke subtle internal reactions: fear, wonder, desire, and channel them to a physical point in his body. Environmental manipulation, he focused on light objects. A feather. A leaf. A drop of water. He never used a wand, not even a fake one. That was his rule. He had to learn to feel magic as part of himself, not as a tool. And then came the most important part, creation. He didn't want to just use spells from this world. He wanted to invent his own. In a handmade notebook, he wrote everything down. Theory number 27, Nonverbal spell casting comparison with Dumbledore's silent magic. Theory number 32, Formation of electric energy using spiral magical vibration. Inspired by Chidori and Rei's Nan from Naruto. Channel energy into the palm via internal rotational impulse. Result, not visible yet, but wrist buzzing was real. Theory number 40, Modification of fire magic using dragon breath technique. Can energy follow breath flow instead of gestures? Possible nonverbal spell with hot air compression. Result, mild burn on index finger. Theory number 44, Channeled slicing force. Inspired by Rasen Shuriken. Test rapid dispersion of magical particles around an axis. Still unstable. Each idea was madness. But it didn't matter. Because unlike the world he'd left behind here, he had magic. And that changed everything. He rarely used magic in front of others. Only in subtle gestures, closing a window with wind, warming his tea when no one watched, calming a sleeping child's nightmare with a single touch to the forehead. Underscore 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 underscore. The orphanage caretakers began to notice something odd. They didn't say he was dangerous, but they knew he was strange. That child never gets sick, whispered a nun. I've never seen him cough. He always seems to know more than he should, another replied. Sometimes I feel like he's watching me as if he can read me. 3-year-old Aurelian heard them from the hallway. He didn't get upset. He simply reaffirmed his decision to stay unnoticed. But in secret, he was preparing. He knew someone would come eventually. The magical world wouldn't ignore his existence for long. And when that time came, he didn't want to be a helpless child who could barely wave a wand. He wanted to be something more. At age 4, he practiced under the dusk sky, focused on breathing and visualization. He'd nearly perfected a heat concentration technique in his palm without touch based on intermediate fire magic from Mushoku Tensei. As he concentrated, he saw it, a thin, black snake coiled at the base of the wall, eyes as dark as his own. He stepped back not out of fear, but surprise. I don't want to hurt you, he said instinctively. The response came as a hiss. One he understood. You don't hurt me. You, speak like us. You're, like the old ones. Never seen one so small. His chest froze. He hadn't spoken English. He had spoken Parcel tongue. And the most surprising thing? He liked it. It didn't feel like a cursed accident. It felt natural. Like a part of him, long asleep, was waking with gratitude. The reptilian tongue felt like it belonged not as a dark inheritance, but as a powerful tool. He spoke with the snake for nearly half an hour. Asked what it ate, why it was there, how it perceived the world. And when it slid away into the shadows, Aurelian knew he'd found a unique ability. Not a defect. That night, he wrote, I can speak Parcel tongue. I understand it. I feel it. And I like it. There is knowledge in serpents. Ancestral memory. I may be able to use this. I want to investigate how to channel magic through non-human sounds. Hypothesis: can a magical language alter the vibration of the environment better than a human one? Can spells be cast in Parseltongue? Explore. He would no longer see it as a curse from his father. He would make it part of who he was. The orphanage library became his greatest ally. The books were old, mundane, and magicless but filled with knowledge. He read about philosophy, biology, architecture, ancient languages, engineering. Every subject was reinterpreted through a magical lens. Were ancient alchemists wizards? Could fractal patterns be used as runes? Could DNA explain magical inheritance? He filled pages with diagrams, magical energy circuits, lists of potential spell words, phonetic combinations that might resonate with reality. He had no guide. No teacher. But he didn't need one. Because he had conviction. Underscore 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 underscore. As his 5th birthday approached, his progress was clear. No fireworks. No levitating furniture. But he had control. Precision. When his emotions surged, he could close his eyes and feel his magic align like a muscle obeying his will. It was no longer accidental. It was intentional. One stormy night, the static in the air made him feel magic tingling across his skin. He locked himself in the bathroom and trained for hours, trying to replicate Chidori. Not the sound or flash but the lethal intent behind the hand. He managed a build-up of heat and vibration in his palm, ending in a burst of blue sparks that scared the orphanage cat. Not perfect. But real. His 5th birthday passed quietly. A candle in a muffin. A song sung by children who didn't know the words. A pat on the shoulder from Mrs. Thorne, the cook. That night, he climbed to the chapel like always. He lit his candle. Opened his notebook. Reviewed his notes. And then, for the first time, he tried something new. He sat cross-legged. Closed his eyes. Focused not on a spell, but on his soul. Who he was. Who he wanted to become. He visualized his body, his energy. A flame in his chest trembling, but real. He fed it with memories. With dreams. With the promise that he would not let the name Riddle mean darkness forever. I don't want to be a villain. Or a hero. I just want to be free, he whispered. He spoke in Parseltongue. Sang a melody he made up. Moved his energy from his chest to his arms, channeled it into his left palm. Buzz. Heat. Light. Then, finally a blue spark. Flickering in his hand. A moment later, it vanished. Aurelian opened his eyes and smiled. It was beautiful. Distant. But not unreachable. For the first time in his short life, Aurelian Riddle truly believed that everything he imagined was possible not just to survive in this story, but to build something new. A different story. A path of his own. A life worth living. Chapter 3 Chapter 3 The impossible just takes longer. November 1983 arrived like a cold whisper seeping through the cracks of the orphanage. Dry branches tapped against the windows on windy nights, and the sky grew grayer with each dawn. The orphanage had a different feel when the cold settled in. Everything slowed down, everything grew quieter. And for Aurelian, that meant more time alone, more hours in the chapel, more room to grow. He didn't care about the cold. Or the orphanage. Or what others whispered behind his back. He didn't need to be accepted. He didn't want to be admired. He only wanted one thing, to become the best version of himself. Building himself from every corner: mind, body, soul, and magic. Not as a promise to others, but as a declaration of war against his own past. It was his way of rewriting the destiny he had inherited. Since he turned 5, his training had grown deeper. His routine remained intact: wake before dawn, sneak into the abandoned chapel, meditate, visualize, push his magic to exhaustion. Empty himself to grow. like a muscle that strengthens through tearing. Only those who reach the bottom of their power know how much they can grow, he reminded himself whenever his hands trembled from overuse. And he kept to it. Every day. Without fail. Some days his entire body trembled after training. Others, he could barely hold a cup without spilling. But in each collapse, he felt something expanding. Not in muscle but in spirit. That month, he adopted a guiding principle: magic could achieve the impossible but only if one believed it was possible. His inspiration didn't come from books, but from a very clear idea: the limit of magic was imagination. He'd drawn that from various anime worlds where he used to dream of having those powers. But one stood above the rest: Black Clover. He remembered how Asta, born without magic, still managed the impossible. Aurelian, with the magic he still didn't fully understand, had sworn to go beyond every limit. Because to him, magic wasn't a tool. It was the key to everything. In his notebook now covered in wax stains, glued pages, and sketches he wrote the phrase that would guide him: magic makes the impossible possible. The only limit is what one believes they can achieve. Imagination is the map. Belief is the switch. With that mindset, he began developing new theories. Each morning, before the nuns lit the stoves, he was already in a corner of the chapel. Sometimes with a candle, others under moonlight, dedicated to a singular goal: to give shape to his magic. Not just to summon it but to structure it. The notes in his journal multiplied with every new discovery. Theory number 59: wandless shields is instinctive defense triggered by emotional reaction possible? Inspired by the Protego spell, but without word or gesture. Can concentrated fear serve as a defensive catalyst? Hypothesis: attempt to imitate Gojo Satoru's infinity. Theory number 60: internal seal construction. If magic flows like energy, can it be woven into internal runes to slowly release a spell, like a magical trap embedded in the body? Theory number 78: programmed magical fatigue. Magic, like muscles, can expand if used daily to the limit. Empty it each day to renew it stronger. Constant effort equals greater magical capacity. Expected result: gradual increase in magical volume and flow. Improved sensitivity and response time. Theory number 79: multiple magical cores. If magic flows through the body, why limit it to a single output point? Better to create multiple nodes: hands, feet, stomach, to broaden options for combat, defense, and movement. First experiment: channeling through feet for magical jump. Partial result: suspension for fractions of a second. Future goal: levitation or enhanced speed. For 3 days, he visualized his magic during meditation. Then, one frozen dawn, while touching the cold floor, the wood began to warm beneath his palm. He wasn't surprised. He just smiled. Because to Aurelian, that wasn't magic responding to the cold. That was his will. One foggy Tuesday typical in London, something strange happened as he practiced Theory 59. Aurelian focused on projecting an energy structure around his body, visualizing a barrier, dense and pulsing in infinity, capable of automatically protecting and repelling any harm. He had failed many times. But that morning, when he heard a creak behind him, likely a cat between the pews, his body reacted before his mind. The jolt startled a surge of energy out of him. It was as if the air around him thickened. He felt it. Something invisible enveloped him for a second, then vanished. No sparks. No light. Just a subtle shift. Exactly what he needed. He wrote rapidly: partial result: instinctive defense triggered by external stimulus. Weak but perceptible. The air changed. Hypothesis: magic channels better when emotion is not forced. Are shields truly an extension of the will to live? Weeks later, he tested another theory: internal runes. He remembered an anime where characters used magical circles carved into their skin to unleash complex techniques. Aurelian adapted the idea: instead of inscribing his flesh, he would imprint them onto his mind and his soul. He visualized a symbol, a pattern, a sequence. Not on his skin, but within his magical flow. A spiral with 3 concentric lines. A spark in the center. For a week, he focused on embedding that pattern into himself. He tied it to his breath, to his pulse. And one afternoon, he succeeded. A spark flared in his right palm. Not blue but white. Just for a second. But enough to make him smile. Theory number 63: Mental runes. The pattern must be simple, symbolic, and repeated with intention. It's not enough to imagine it, you must feel it. As if tattooed onto your soul. This is only the beginning. By mid-December, Aurelian turned his focus once again to Parseltongue. Not out of heritage but because he understood it as a magic in itself. He dreamed of serpents more often. In those dreams, they spoke in sounds that resonated through his body. He couldn't explain how, but certain combinations of words in Parseltongue affected the world around him. He tried one sequence while touching a dried flower. He murmured, channeled magic, and the flower moistened slightly. Theory number 82: Spells in Parseltongue. Combination of magical language plus emotional intention plus energy direction equals tangible effect. Can a branch of sorcery based entirely on non-human languages be developed? Hypothesis: phonetics affect the vibrational frequency of magic. Just as grimoires adapt spells to users in Black Clover, perhaps each magical language enhances different aspects of the soul. Aurelian didn't just want to understand Parseltongue. He wanted to create magic from it. To make his inheritance not a cursed gift but a door. A thought accompanied him every night: if I believe something is possible, I'm only one step away from achieving it. And it wasn't naive hope. It was conviction. He knew most wizards would call him mad. That without a wand, without schooling, he'd never achieve anything. But how many of them had tried creating their own magical theory from scratch? More importantly, how many had dared to forge magic they didn't inherit, but invented? As the new year approached, he was asked to help clean the old library, one of the few children who spent time there, so they thought he'd enjoy it. While sorting books for cataloging, he found a forgotten volume buried among donation boxes. It was a physics book, explaining how waves could interfere with each other to create new resonances. He wondered, could magic behave similarly? An idea consumed him: the possibility of fusing 2 types of magic. Theory number 88: Dual magic. Combine 2 types of channeling: emotional, e.g., rage, and structural, e.g., a rune pattern. If both vibrate at the same frequency, do they reinforce or cancel each other? He tried a simple combination. He used his internal spiral rune while feeling fear. He pushed the emotion into the center of the symbol. The first time, it failed. The second, his nose bled. The third, the candle went out without wind. And a second later relit itself. Result: synthesis. The fire came from emotion, but followed the form of the rune. First evidence of a dual origin spell. He slept little. Ate just enough. But he lived fully. Because every breakthrough was a stone in his path. He didn't seek to save the world. Or destroy it. Only to create his own. He dreamed of a vast mansion. Of books that resonated with his very presence. Of a grand entrance, sealed with a name carved in stone, Riddle. And with a motto that meant everything he fought for and the path he was following: blood is not destiny. Magic is choice. Chapter 4, Chapter 4: Promise of Blood and Magic, narrated by Stinky, the house elf. My name is Stinky. I haven't always been called that. They used to call me creature, shadow, that thing, or simply you. I never had a real name. But she gave me one, and since then, it's the only name I accept. I used to be a simple elf, a rag with legs, as pure-blood wizards like to say. I cleaned up spilled potions, fetched scraps, and sometimes served as a living shield in duels. No one spoke to me kindly. No one looked me in the eyes. Until she came. Elaine Harper. She saved me. Freed me without chains. Gave me a home without conditions. She taught me to read, to think, to cry without shame. And most importantly, she taught me that even those born to serve, can choose who they call a true friend. I met her while she was still a student at Hogwarts. I belonged to an old pure-blood family, the Blishwicks, decadent and cruel. They used my magic for everything, washing their robes, cleaning blood off the floor after experiments, or punishing me for mistakes I didn't commit. My ears were torn when Elaine found me. It was a winter afternoon, in the Forbidden Forest. Snow fell like ash. My legs were bleeding. I dragged a broken chain, barely breathing. I had escaped. The Blishwicks told me they were going to set me free forever, which in their tongue meant killing me and using my heart for a blood ritual. I ran until I collapsed. Hid beneath a root, covered in mud, trembling. I cried, hidden under a hollow trunk, waiting for the centaurs to end it. And then, a light. Light footsteps. A calm voice. A soaked blue Ravenclaw cloak. A wand in shaking fingers. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling. She seemed fragile, but her eyes reflected calm. She crouched beside the trunk and lit it with her wand. I shrank, expecting a curse. I thought it was a trap. I closed my eyes. But her wand cast not a punishment, but warmth. A healing spell. Clumsy, but sincere. When I opened my eyes, I saw her face. Dark, wide eyes. Brows furrowed with worry. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I swear I won't." I wanted to run. But my body wouldn't move. "What have they done to you?" she whispered. Her fingers trembled as they touched my ribs exposed. My ears hung, torn. My left eye was crusted over. "Why do you speak to me?" I asked in a dull voice. She knelt and offered her hand, smiling gently. "Because you are not alone," she said. I looked at her as if she were a mirage. Who cared for a house elf? I thought. From that moment on, I knew I would never be the same. Underscore 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 I lived with her in secret for years. First at Hogwarts, hidden among the other kitchen elves, the old books of the library, or behind enchanted curtains. She helped me read. Let me choose what stories to read before bed. A house elf, making a choice. When she graduated, she took me with her. We lived in a small enchanted cottage near the Forest of Dean, where she'd gone as a child. There we built a home. She spoke of her dreams of a world without hatred among wizards. "Stinky, will you read this with me?" she'd say, showing me books on magical philosophy, history, Muggle tales. "Stinky?" I once asked, curious at how sweetly she said it. "That's what I want to call you. It sounds funny, but cute. Unless you don't like it, Stinky likes it. A lot. Stinky has a name." She laughed every time I said it. I slept near her bed, not because she ordered it but because I wanted to protect her. Her magic was powerful, yes, but also tender. She saw the world in a way that made it less dark. Warmer. Once, I knelt before her and said, "Stinky belongs to Miss Elaine. Stinky wants to serve. Stinky swears to obey." She stood and looked me in the eyes. "You don't belong to me. You're not mine, Stinky. You're my friend. If you stay, it will be because you want to, not because I order it or because you owe me." Those words hurt, because I wanted to belong to her. But they also made me feel whole. Happy to be called a friend. She never used magic to command me. She never needed to. And I stayed. Because I never wanted to be anywhere else. Underscore 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 years passed. I noticed changes in Miss Elaine. She returned late. Her eyes tired but contemplative, like she had found something. Sometimes her hands trembled. One night, she came home different. Silent. The food grew cold. She didn't speak until she sat by the window, hugging her knees. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "Is it, the dark wizard's?" I asked, not daring to say his name. He had left her, I assumed. The dark wizard. The one who should not be named. I had seen him only once, from afar. And my magic cowered like a mouse. His presence was inhuman. Like magic given flesh. A volcano about to erupt. I had heard the Blishwicks speak of mages who could destroy entire cities with a single spell. They were called archmages. "Why don't we flee?" I asked one day. "To the mountains, or another country. I will help you raise him." "I can't run from who I am, Stinky," she said softly. "And I don't want to. I just hope he has my heart. That he knows how to love. That he doesn't repeat this tragic story." Her belly grew. I could feel the soul's vibration even without touching it. It was intense. Powerful. But different. A child, with two very different bloodlines pulsing within. Elaine sang every night. She asked me to read aloud. Sometimes she cried in silence. Not out of fear, but love. She knew she wouldn't survive. And yet, she never stopped smiling. "Stinky," she said one night, "if something happens to me, take him far away. Somewhere safe." "No, no, no. Stinky won't let you die. Stinky won't leave Miss Elaine. Stinky will die with you," I shouted. "You can't stop it. But you can do something more important. You can give him another story. You can protect him," she said gently, but with conviction. "No, Miss Elaine. Don't say that. Stinky can't imagine a world without you. But you will. Because it's not about me. It's about him. About Aurelian." She said his name with such love that the magic in the room shimmered. "Will you promise me?" "Stinky swears by his blood, by his magic, by his soul," I whispered, "a sacred vow." Elaine hugged me then. And I cried, silently, so she wouldn't see. Underscore 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 the night of the birth was hell. Rain fell in sheets. The cottage creaked. I prepared hot water, towels, potions. But it wasn't enough. Elaine screamed and writhed. Her wand fell. Magic no longer came at her call. "Hold on, Miss Elaine. Please." I couldn't heal her. Elves don't have that kind of magic. I just held her hand and prayed to the old elven spirits to let her live. And then, a cry. A baby. Small. Strong. Pale. With dark eyes like hers. Elaine held him. Kissed his forehead. Her lips still curled in a soft smile like she knew she had won. She looked at him one last time, whispering, "You will be called Aurelian Riddle. You will carry his name. Not because he deserves it, but because you will transform it." She sang to him. A whisper. No screaming. No tears. She just faded. Forever. I fulfilled the promise. I approached Aurelian. He didn't understand what I was, but he looked at me. And I swear, something inside him knew. I wrapped him in the enchanted blanket. Embroidered the letters AR into the corner. The one she made, the one that only glowed when touched with true love. I sang the song she taught me once. A Muggle lullaby. About trains and stars. That night, in the rain, I walked to London. Invisible to Muggle eyes. My magic kept him warm. I slipped through alleys. Hid among statues. Until I reached the gate. I placed the basket at the steps of St. Emmerich's orphanage, carefully. The embroidered note read, "His name is Aurelian Riddle. Care for him. And give him another story." But I did not abandon him. I returned every night. Invisible. Hidden in shadows, tunnels, rooftops. Always close. Watching him grow. Underscore 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 Year 1 He was quiet. Observant. He never cried without reason. When caretakers looked after him, he stared at them, as if understanding things no baby should. One night, I saw him reach toward a feather with his gaze. There was no visible magic. Just a soft energy. An intention. He wasn't a normal child. And I felt proud. Year 2 he walked early. Not because he wanted to explore, but because it felt like he was in a hurry to learn. He played in silence. Watched the nuns with suspicion. Always alert. One night, I saw him try to warm his cup, with his hands alone. And when he succeeded, he smiled for the first time. A smile identical to his mother's. Year 3 he started sneaking out of bed at night. He went to an old ruined chapel within the orphanage grounds. Sat cross-legged on the floor, and meditated. Meditated. A 3-year-old. Breathing in rhythm. Channeling energy. I watched him from the rafters. Every day. Every failed attempt. Every spark. He began moving small objects, generating heat, even speaking with animals. One day, he spoke to a snake. In parcel tongue. And his voice was clear. Powerful. At first, I felt fear. Then, awe. Year 4 he had a notebook now. He drew runes, diagrams, and ideas. Spoke softly to himself, theorizing new spells. He read donated Muggle books and transformed them into magical experiments. Once, he almost set a bench on fire. Another time, he calmed a crying child with just a hand on the forehead. I followed him every night. In silence. From the library rafters or beneath stairwells. And each night, I thought, Miss Elaine, your son is fulfilling your wish. He will be someone worth remembering. Year 5 he turned 5 without a party. One cupcake. One candle. A half-hearted song. But he wasn't sad. He climbed to the chapel. Lit a candle. Began chanting in parcel tongue. Visualizing his soul. Molding his energy. And I saw it. A blue spark ignited in his palm. I cried. As I hadn't cried since Elaine died. And that night, I made a decision. Underscore 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 5 winters. 5 springs. Aurelian was no longer a baby. He was a child who defied his destiny with every breath. One night, I waited until he finished training. He sat alone, as always, in the chapel, fingers still faintly glowing with gathered energy. I approached without a sound. Aurelian, I said, voice breaking. He turned. He didn't look afraid. He looked straight at me. Who are you? He asked. I'm someone who's watched you grow. Since your first day. Are you a wizard? He asked, curiously. No, young master. I'm a house elf. Your mother saved me. And you are my promise. His eyes widened. He stared at me in silence. My mother? You knew her? He asked, his tone gentler. I nodded. My hands trembled. I was with her until the end. And ever since. I've been with you. Always. Aurelian stepped closer. He didn't say a word. He simply hugged me. Small. Delicate. But with a strength in his soul I couldn't explain. And I, for the first time in years, felt emotions I thought lost to time. I hugged him back and whispered, "You are more than him. More than her. You are you, Aurelian. And you are not alone. I am Stinky. The elf who learned what friendship meant. Who chose a promise over freedom. And though I live in the cracks of the magical world, in forgotten corners, I know I was part of the beginning of something new. Because every time that boy lifts his hand, and a spark ignites, I know Elaine did not die in vain." Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Promise. The chapel was silent. Melted candles left trails of wax on the stone floor, and the air smelled of extinguished smoke and old pages. Aurelian still held his notebook when the embrace slowly ended. The boy stepped back. He looked closely at the elf with torn ears and teary eyes. He wasn't afraid. Only a strange sensation, as if something ancient had awakened. "Can you tell me about her?" he asked quietly. "About my mother." Stinky looked at him as if he had been asked to reveal the holiest secret. He sat on a dusty bench, hands on his knees, and began to speak. He told him about Elaine Harper. About her years at Hogwarts, how she helped those no one else would, how her magic wasn't just powerful, it was compassionate. He spoke of her laughter, of how she read aloud, of how she never treated Stinky as a servant but as a friend. She used to say, that love wasn't a weakness, but the only magic everyone can do, said the elf, lowering his gaze. She sang to you before you were born. Spoke to you as if you already understood. Aurelian listened in silence, memorizing every word as if they were a spell. He didn't cry. But he felt something in his chest warmer than any spark of magic, love, affection, pride. "Thank you for protecting me," he said. "It was my promise," Stinky replied. "And Stinky keeps promises to the end." There was a moment of silence. Then Aurelian stepped closer. "Can you help me with something else?" he asked with a smile. The elf looked up. "I want to know everything they haven't told me. I want to understand the magical world as it truly is today. What's happened, who rules, how wizards behave. And I need books. Any kind. Spells, history, theory, whatever you can find. Can you get them?" The elf's eyes shone, first with surprise, then with determination. "Yes. Yes, Stinky can. But you must be careful. Many magical books aren't meant for children. Some change those who read them. It doesn't matter. I want to be prepared. I want control. And for that, I need knowledge." Stinky nodded slowly. "Then I'll start tonight, young Aurelian." Before leaving that night, Stinky stopped. He pulled something else from his rags, a small black leather pouch, with a worn silver drawstring. "Lady Elaine also asked me to give you this, when you began seeking your own path." He handed it over with both hands, as if it were sacred. Aurelian held it carefully. It wasn't heavy, but something inside glowed with a subtle warmth. He opened it, and fell silent. Inside were coins. Golden galleons. Many. But no matter how much he reached in, they didn't run out. "It's a bottomless pouch," he murmured. "Enchanted by her herself," Stinky said reverently. "You can only pull out what you truly need. But it will be enough. It will let you learn, store, buy, and survive if necessary." The lady thought of everything. Aurelian clutched the pouch to his chest. She knew she wouldn't be alone for long. He whispered, almost to himself. "She knew I would find the way. Underscore 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 underscore." The following weeks were full. Stinky returned each night with something new, a torn page from a book on magical creatures, a piece of an old enchanted map, a mutilated copy of the Daily Prophet. Aurelian analyzed them like an alchemist at a makeshift laboratory. With the help of the pouch and the resources Stinky began to gather on his small expeditions through the magical world, he started to piece together a map of how magical society functioned. He soon discovered that the magical world was more unstable than he had imagined. Among the things Stinky brought back, the most intriguing was an almost illegible piece of parchment with the title of a book he had never heard of, Wandless Magic, Ancestral Tradition of the Forgotten. "Where did you find this?" he asked, fascinated. "In a magical library in Soho, on the other side of the city," Stinky replied. "I stole it from a burn bin. They were going to destroy it." Aurelian held it as if it were gold. "I want the full book," he said. "I'll do my best," the elf replied. Aurelian smiled. He knew his path wouldn't be easy. That wandless magic, parcel tongue spells, mental runes, everything he was developing wasn't found in common books. But he wasn't alone. Not anymore. He had a legacy. A friend. A purpose. As he slept, he heard a soft voice. His mother's voice. Singing. The British magical world still maintained structures similar to the canon. The Ministry of Magic remained the same as in the books. Hogwarts was still the main magical institution. Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade were the most well-known commercial centers. But a major change compared to the canon was that wizards in this world weren't just more powerful, they were far more numerous than those who had appeared in the books of his past life. There weren't hundreds of thousands. There were millions. Small, hidden schools. Underground magical communities. Regional ministries. A hidden network on a global scale. And not only that, there was a significant difference he had begun to understand. Wizards were classified into levels 5, to be exact. Initiate the early years of a wizard, when they're just starting to channel their energy. Conjurer wizards with conscious control of their magic, capable of performing standard spells. Invoker wizards who can use advanced magic, complex enchantments, and magic without constant contact with a wand. Archmage, a level reserved for the most powerful. Wizards with influence over reality itself, able to alter their surroundings with no visible effort. They are said to live over 200 years. Sage, almost a legend. Few in history have reached it. They can create new branches of magic, rewrite arcane laws, even touch the very structure of the soul. In the books, Dumbledore and Voldemort were among the most powerful wizards known. In this universe, Aurelian dared to say they would be classified as archmages. Some documents hinted that Merlin was a sage. No one else had achieved that rank in centuries. He suspected his mother had at least reached the level of invoker. Maybe more. Otherwise, she couldn't have enchanted the pouch with all its layers of spells. Underscore 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 The orphanage chapel had become more than just a refuge. Under the dim light of the enchanted candles Stinky brought from the outside world, the place looked less like a ruin and more like a sanctuary. Each night, Aurelian waited for the elf's arrival with a mix of anxiety and intellectual hunger. "What did you find this time?" he asked one night, his voice full of anticipation. Stinky pulled a small bundle of crumpled papers from his tunic. Some pages were stained, others incomplete, but Aurelian received them as if they were treasures. A fragment of a book on modern magical history, and a report from the Daily Prophet. "I took it from a bin at the ministry," he said with contained pride. Aurelian began reading immediately. The documents spoke of international surveillance movements, the rise of a magical school in the Himalayas, internal conflicts in South America over the control of an ancient magical ruin. And one sentence made him frown. Due to the intervention of the Archmage of Nubia, the conflict was stopped without magical casualties. "Another Archmage," he whispered. "Yes, young Aurelian," replied Stinky, lowering his voice with respect. "There are 7 alive. It's believed that only 7 on the entire planet have reached that level, at least since the fall of he who must not be named." Aurelian turned toward him, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Who are they?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "Albus Dumbledore, in Western Europe. No one doubts his wisdom or his power. Some say he is the closest wizard to the level of sage in this generation. And the others? I persisted. Stinky crouched down, as if reciting those names was something solemn. One lives in Asia, Maitre Ren Yao, an archmage of balance who masters internal alchemy and spiritual transmutation. He protects a school hidden among the glaciers of Tibet. He rarely leaves his temple. Another is in Africa, Archmage Nala Mtekai, from Nubia. She controls storms and commands white necromancy. She founded and leads an order dedicated to protecting magical sites from tribal wars and artifact looting. In North America, there's Solomon Gray, a thin, blind man, but they say he can read truth in any thought. His mind can see the soul of anyone who looks at him. In South America, a man known as Anayan of the Flame, an elemental archmage who roams the Andes and its volcanoes. He is never seen more than once a decade. In Central Europe, there's Marianne Elsenberg, settled in the enchanted ruins of the Holy Roman Empire, now Austria. She specializes in manipulating short-term time and collective memory. Her political influence is silent but immense. And the last, is in Russia. Kazimir Volyov. The most feared. A former officer of the old Soviet magical government. A summoner of war spirits. He lives alone, surrounded by dark artifacts. Aurelian was silent. 7 archmages. And his father, had been one of them. That changes everything, he murmured. Yes, young sir. This world is vaster than some believe. And more, dangerous. Days later, while reviewing a text on modern magical history, Aurelian looked up with a furrowed brow. He began to plan something more ambitious. Until that moment, he had depended on what Stinky could steal, rescue, or save from oblivion. Now he had galleons. Not many, but enough for what he needed at that moment. Thanks to the bottomless pouch his mother had enchanted, he could withdraw coins only when he truly needed them. Aurelian knew the time had come. Stinky, I need you to get me something more specific. What does the young master desire? Information on occlumency and legilimency. Everything you can find. The elf blinked. That kind of magic? It's uncommon. Restricted. Hard to find books, but not impossible. Use the money. Buy what you must. Bribe if necessary. I can't allow anyone into my mind without permission. Stinky lowered his gaze, nodding gravely. I've heard things. He said quietly. There are wizards who can enter your thoughts while you sleep. Extract memories. Even, plant ideas. That won't happen to me, said Aurelian coldly. I won't let anyone see inside me. Underscore 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 magical expenses hidden in his notebook. 4 galleons for an incomplete edition of Fortresses of the Mind, by Brunhild von Drachenstein. 9 galleons for a personal diary fragment from a Bulgarian occlumens, with notes on shared dreams. 12 galleons for an enchanted mirror to train emotional responses. Each object, each book, each page was another brick in the construction of his mental fortress. Aurelian began training more intensely than ever. In addition to his magical channeling practices, meditation, and theoretical development, he now spent hours building inner structures in his mind. He imagined corridors, mental traps, emotional smoke screens. He even wrote false memories, which he recited every night as if they were real. Aurelian analyzed and categorized mental magic, occlumency, mental defense. The ability to close the mind, hide emotions, block magical intrusion. High difficulty. Requires emotional discipline, structured memory, total control of thought flow. Legilimency, intrusion. Reading memories, emotions. At advanced level, modifying, inserting, erasing. Dangerous. Ethically gray. But useful. Hypothesis: a trained mind not only resists but deceives. It can create false memories, mislead the enemy's intentions. Just like a magical illusion, but inside the mind. Theory number 101, if the mind is a castle, each thought must have its tower. Create mental chambers, sealed doors, emotional traps. Train reactions. Rewrite internal order. Expected result, partial block against basic legilimency. Theory number 106, if the mind is trained like a fortress, it's possible to build layers of mental protection like concentric walls. Goal, block emotional probing and deflect surface thought reading. At the same time, he continued exhausting his body with magical training each morning. He woke earlier than anyone, he walked barefoot down to the chapel. There, he channeled heat into his palms until his hands trembled. Visualized silent spells with his tongue pressed between his teeth. Tested new variations of mental runes, inspired by sound patterns in parcel tongue. Forced himself to hold magic in his feet until he could maintain levitation for more than 3 seconds. Tried to fuse emotion and pattern and direction, as in his Theory 88, repeating the combination until his fingers went numb. Theory number 109, if emotion is fire and structure is metal, the fusion produces an inner magical forge. By repeating the pattern with intense emotional intention, the soul can be marked with a new ability. Sometimes he collapsed on the stone floor, gasping, unable to move. But he never stopped smiling. Knowledge was coming from everywhere. Sometimes, Stinky brought it wrapped in old rags, broken books, dusty pages torn from hidden libraries or forgotten ministry archives. Other times, they were purchased with galleons, grimoires bound in enchanted leather, technical manuals on living runes, philosophical treatises on ethical magic, and classified documents that should have been destroyed decades ago. The chapel's small altar had become an improvised desk. There, Aurelian read, copied, compared, crossed out, then theorized. Each book was a window. Each note, a key to breaking limits. Recent acquisitions from the so-called Riddle Archive, The Invisible Flow, a comparative study of mental magic in Eastern Europe recovered by Stinky from an abandoned magical school in Romania. Treatise on images of inner defense bought at a hidden market in Manchester. Resonances of the soul and their relation to mental structures found among the remains of a demolished library in Prague. Uncensored history of the Grey Era, Dumbledore and Grindelwald acquired for 23 galleons at a silent auction in Nocturne Alley. That last one left a deep mark on him. Stinky delivered it wrapped in a black cloth. They were hiding it like poison, he said. It cost me double. But I think it was worth it. And it was. The book wasn't large, but it was dense. Written by a Swiss magical historian, its author had been expelled from the International Confederation of Wizards for revealing politically sensitive secrets. Aurelian devoured every word. Excerpt from Chapter 7. The Nurmengard Summit. Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald were more than enemies. They were mirrors. Two brilliant, idealistic young men, with a power few could comprehend, whose visions of the world diverged at the most dangerous crossroads, the love of freedom. After the creation of his fortress in Nurmengard, Grindelwald began a radical movement not only to elevate wizards above muggles, but to rewrite the magical structures of the world. His magic was not only powerful, it was innovative. He mastered symbols of ancient power, such as the Deathly Hallows, and possessed forbidden knowledge of lost runes and absorption enchantments. Dumbledore, already a recognized archmage at the time, avoided intervening for years. Not out of cowardice, but because of internal scars. His story with Gellert was personal. They had dreamed together of a magical utopia. They had loved the same power. Perhaps, they had loved each other. The duel at Nurmengard lasted 3 days. It wasn't just a physical battle, it was a war of ideas. They clashed with spells never recorded, transforming the very matter of the castle. The air turned to magma. Time twisted. And when Grindelwald finally fell, it wasn't with hatred but with sorrow. It's said that Dumbledore wept. Not for the victory, but for the broken promise. Aurelian closed the book with trembling hands. Not from fear, but from inspiration. This this is the level I want to reach, he whispered. No. I'm going to surpass it. Not just learn. Create magic. Not just defend. Shape the world. And above all, not repeat their mistakes. Because now he understood that even an archmage could be lost if he didn't master his soul first. Chapter 6 Vision Year 1986. Aurelian was no longer a little boy. At 8 years old, he had changed more than time alone could explain. His face was still pale, his eyes as dark as silent wells, but his gaze was different. It was the reflection of a soul awake, waiting, studying. In the 3 years that had passed, he had not stopped training for a single day. The early mornings found him still in the abandoned chapel, meditating on cold stone, channeling magic through body and soul, tracing mental patterns that only he understood. His notebook was no longer a single one, but several, bound by stinky with magical thread and protected with simple spells of concealment. His magic had evolved. It was no longer accidental. Not even theoretical. It was instinctive. Theory and Degree 59, renamed, Instinctive Infinite Defense. He had started from an idea: if fear was capable of activating an unconscious defense, then why not train the body to respond automatically to any threat? For years, Aurelian had thrown objects at himself, from stones, books, balls, glasses, to fire, but controlled. While trying not to think. Not to formulate spells. Just to feel the danger and let the magic react before the mind. The result was not a visible barrier, nor a classic shield. It was an alteration of the magical space around his body. An invisible, almost imperceptible second skin that deflected projectiles, cushioned impacts, slowed physical and magical forces. It was not constant. But when it was activated, it did it on its own. He called it saturation instinct or instinctive infinite defense, a microzone of magical defense created by the body's memory and its own magical power, not by mental intention. Theory and Degree 59. Instinctive infinite defense successful. In moments of danger, my magic reacts like a second skin, expanding in 0.5 seconds from the skin. It seems to work with stimuli such as surprise, violent noise, or rough contact. Similar to Satoru Gojo's infinity, but limited in duration and range. Next step, keep it active without external stimulus and in less time. The development of this defense made him more confident. More ambitious. And then, with the maturity that only an old soul could sustain, he began to look beyond magic. The afternoon was falling over the grey sky of London. From the bell tower of the orphanage, barely a glimmer of sunlight filtered through the clouds, and the city seemed asleep, suspended in a perpetual haze. Aurelian sat on the roof, his clothes flapping in the wind, his legs crossed, his notebook on his knees. He looked at the world without speaking. The same world that had ignored or misunderstood him for 8 years. But he was no longer someone lost to his fate. Not for some time. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. 8 years. 8 years in which he had lived with his soul awake and his mind sharp. Since his mother brought him into the world and died with a smile, all he had done was prepare. Not out of fear. But out of conviction. He had trained his magic every day, even when his body gave out. Every meditation. Every practice in the chapel. Every line written in his notebooks was a step towards a future only he could imagine. And now, looking back, he knew, he had changed his destiny. He was not just a reflection of his father. He was Aurelian. Building something no other wizard had ever attempted, a unique magic, the product of imagination. He remembered his first attempt to channel energy into a spiral. Inspired by the rays Nan, he had wanted to mold magic in his palm, without a wand, using only rotation, magical friction, and internal control. At first, it was just a vibration. Then a warm spin. Eventually, a swirl of magic-laden air, though with no shape or destructive power yet. Prototype, Raise Nan, version 0.8, unstable energy. No mass. Dispersion in 1.2 seconds. But the rotation was real. Very real. Next, he had tried a cutting spell. Inspired by Chidori, it sought to channel elemental magic through the fingers, mimicking the versatility of lightning. Once, he succeeded, a white spark that spread like a wind blade and cut a scroll from 10 feet away. It was not lightning. It was not fire. It was pure energy with cutting intent. Prototype, Directional Cut Elemental Chidori, version 1.1, requires emotional rotation and mental pattern. Range, 2 to 3 meters. Noise, slight buzzing sound. Result, clean cut on sheet of paper, no combustion. Risk of overload if repeated without rest. Another moment, I had visualized a more abstract technique, the Kamehameha. He knew that this concept required a massive accumulation of energy channeled into a single point. So he adapted it. Instead of visible lightning, he created a spell that concentrated heat and air compression in his hands, generating an invisible burst of magical pressure. It had no noticeable physical impact, but it extinguished candles from 10 feet away. Prototype, Impulse Wave, version 0.3, charge of magic between hands and linear direction. Effect, displacement of air and heat. Future potential, controlled shockwave. They were not complete spells. They didn't have a name yet. But they were his. I don't need to understand the world, he said quietly to himself, I just need to remake it my way. And then, he allowed himself a new thought, he would no longer hide. For years he had practiced hiding. Controlling his emotions. Warming tea in secret. Opening doors with a whisper. Talking to snakes alone at night. But now it was different. He wouldn't expose himself yet. He wouldn't do magic in front of everyone. But he wouldn't disguise who he was either. If he walked through the orphanage and a candle was lit as he passed, let it be so. If his shadow moved a second later than his body, let them notice. It would no longer live as a secret. From that day on, his existence would be like his magic, contained, elegant, precise, but impossible to ignore. It was then, at that point of calm and clarity, that he descended from the roof and found Stinky waiting by the chapel. We need to talk, Aurelian said to him. And there began the plan to create a fortune with his past knowledge. The elf leaned in, curious. I've been thinking, I can no longer rely only on what we randomly find or buy. I need real resources. A network. Influence. And for that, I need one thing, money. Stinky blinked. To have a fortune, like rich wizards. Exactly. But much better. Something never before seen in the world, that only I can build. The elf cocked his head. How, young Aurelian? Aurelian smiled with that gesture he only used when an idea consumed him. He stood up and walked over to his experiment corner. I've been developing a recipe for a self-healing magic ink. And another for an enchanted stone that glows when someone tells a lie. They're just prototypes, but if I perfect them, we could sell them. And not only that, we could start something. A store. A name. A legacy. Stinky rubbed his hands together, excited. And where would we start? Aurelian spread his finger over the map, until he stopped at a specific point, Diagon Alley. First, we'll go to Gringotts, he declared excitedly. I want to perform an inheritance test since using the galleons my mother left is not quite right. Who knows, maybe my father will have some gold, and start moving in that world. Going unnoticed, but moving forward. Stinky nodded slowly. It may be dangerous, but necessary. I can help you lay low until you get to the bank. I'll go with you. Aurelian looked down, thoughtfully. You know, it's ironic. I used to dream of walking down the alley as a student excited about his first wand. Now I'll do it as someone who wants to build an empire, a legacy, be late more. And then, in a low voice so that only he would hear, but I don't care. I didn't come to this world to repeat history. I came to write a new one. That night, he wrote a single line in his new notebook, one lined in black leather and sealed with a magic padlock: blood is not the legacy. Vision is. Underscore 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 underscore. The chosen day arrived with overcast skies. Clouds trailed over London like a veil of ash, and the air smelled of old rain and coal. Aurelian combed his hair carefully. Not because he cared about aesthetics, but because everything had to look normal. Ordinary. Monotonous. Like any other orphanage child who went out on short leave. To the library again, Riddle, said Mrs. Thorne, pursing her lips as she signed the sign-out sheet. You're going to wear your eyes out among so many books. Reading is cheaper than a new pair of glasses, he replied with a slight smile. That doesn't even make sense, Riddle. That's why I said it. The woman rolled her eyes and handed him a patched scarf. 2 hours, tops. And stay out of the way, she reminded. Of course not, he lied calmly. Outside, Stinky was waiting for him in a narrow alley between two decrepit buildings. He wore a long hooded robe, which made him look more like a shadow than a creature. As soon as Aurelian crossed the rusty gate of the orphanage, the elf wiggled his fingers and a slight tingle covered the boy's body. Cloudy perception spell, he whispered. You're not invisible, but no one will remember seeing you. Perfect, he smiled in a slow, almost proud way. They walked between grey streets and damp markets. They took a bus that creaked under braking, got off at a forgotten section of Cecil Court, and then turned down a passage between an instrument store and a bookstore that no longer sold books. There, he stopped. In front of him, a reddish brick wall with a slightly different row, almost as if it formed a pattern. Are you ready, young Aurelian? Asked Stinky, in a barely audible voice. I have been since before I was born. Stinky nodded and tapped the bricks in a precise pattern, 3 vertical taps, 2 diagonal, 1 central. The bricks shuddered. Then, like an awakening organism, the wall opened. Diagon Alley unfolded before him like an explosion of color and compressed magic. Aurelian held his breath. It was the first time he had seen it. Not in dreams, not in books, not in inherited memories. He was seeing it with his own eyes. Shop windows glittered with floating artifacts, scrolls that wrote themselves, cauldrons that bubbled without fire. Wizards and witches crossed in robes of every color, some with tall hats, others with brooms hanging on their backs, children laughing as they chased after enchanted mice or chocolate frogs. One store displayed spinning wands in glass cases. Another sold quills with crystal tips and ink that glowed like liquid fire. In the background, an ice cream shop smoked with magical mist, and next to it, a magical creature store let out squawks and squawks that were not of this world. But Aurelian did not stop. He had a clear objective that day. Stinky was leading him a few paces behind, watchful, silent. And then, he saw the building. Imposing, white, leaning as if it defied architecture itself, with carved pillars and gargoyles that moved when you didn't look directly at them. Gringotts the Goblin Bank. He stopped in front of the great bronze doors. There, engraved with runes and graceful lines, was the classical warning from the books. He read it in a low voice, with a smile that was not entirely innocent: Enter, stranger, but take heed, of the sin of greed and its dark snare. For those who seek foreign treasures in this place, shall find more than they can bear. The wind ruffled his scarf. His fingers brushed the bottomless bag that hung, invisible, inside his coat. I don't come to steal, he said. I come to reclaim what belongs to me. And to build the rest. Thus he took the first step toward the entrance. Chapter 7, Chapter 7. The roots of gold. The bronze doors closed behind them with a whisper more frightening than a slamming door. The interior of Gringotts was vast, cold, and dazzling. The floor, white marble, reflected the enchanted light of floating chandeliers that hung like still constellations. The walls, covered with pillars carved with arcane symbols, seemed to vibrate with an ancient and dense magic. And at the back, behind a counter as long as a train, were the goblins. Short, bony, with elongated ears and fingers like feathered claws. Each one wrote with such absolute concentration that not even the slightest murmur seemed able to distract them. Aurelian advanced with a slow, measured pace, accompanied by Stinky, who followed him silently from the shadow closest to the wall. Once in the center of the room, Aurelian raised his voice. Firm. Clear. Good morning, I wish to speak with a magical inheritance manager. The goblins did not react immediately. But one, seated at a raised black wooden desk, barely turned his face towards him. His eyes were like burning coals. Name, he asked, without emotion. Aurelian Riddle. That time, the silence was more pronounced. The goblin raised an eyebrow, closed his book with surgical precision, and hopped off the stool. She walked towards him with silent steps, and watched him closely. Very well. Follow me. He was led through a side door into a narrower corridor. The walls here were smooth stone, undecorated, and the air had a distinct density, as if each breath was filtered by banking magic. Do you have any proof of your lineage? Who were your parents? The goblin asked. My mother's name was Elaine Harper, said Aurelian. My father is Tom Marvolo Riddle. The goblin didn't blink, but his jaw barely tensed. There is no record of an official union between the two, the goblin spat. I know. That is why I wish to perform an inheritance test. And verify if there is a vault linked to me. The goblin looked at him for a second longer, then nodded. Wait here. He left through a small door at the back of the room. Aurelian was left alone with Stinky. Are you sure, young Aurelian? Whispered the elf. This could generate reactions, alerts if there is anything to my name or anything due to me as heir. It is time to know. He looked at his reflection in the security mirror floating nearby. I am not an accident. I am a consequence. Several minutes passed. Then the goblin returned with a carved wooden box and a crystal quill wrapped in a cloth. Direct magical lineage test, he said, requires a drop of blood on the scroll. The goblin unfolded the magic scroll in one motion. The crystal quill, hollow and cold, waited on the table. Aurelian extended his finger without hesitation, pricked, and dropped a precise drop of blood onto the enchanted edge. The parchment vibrated with a faint reddish glow, and then ancient letters began to slowly engrave themselves, as if an invisible hand wrote from time itself. The letters began to appear in golden ink. Gringotts hereditary record name, Aurelian Riddle. Biological father, Tom Marvolo Riddle, presumed dead. Biological mother, Elaine Harper, deceased. Status, legitimate direct heir. Inheritance rights, valid recognized ancestral lines. Gaunt family, last living legitimate heir. Linked vaults. Vault 7, Gaunt family, active, no funds or treasure. Condition, magical ruin. Protected by inherited curses. Historical archives available. The goblin read quietly, then nodded. As we suspected, the last Gaunt heir. And the vault? Asked Aurelian curiously. It exists, said the goblin, but in extremely sorry condition. He pulled out a small file of secondary parchments, and placed it on the table. The Gaunts were an ancient and very proud family, but by the end of their known lineage, they lived in miserable conditions. This vault contains no gold, no valuable artifacts. Only vestiges, deteriorated grimoires, broken arcane relics, poorly preserved scrolls, perhaps some objects with historical or magical value, if you know what to look for. Aurelian looked at the document with a neutral face. He did not look surprised. About the riddles, do you have any information? No house registered as such. Only a Muggle line extinct in the mid-20th century. Nothing in our records connects that branch to a formal vault. Only the Gaunt line exists, and you are its only living heir. What about my mother? Asked Aurelian. She had no registered vault, said the goblin, without looking up. According to Gringotts records, she never opened an account. She probably lived outside the formal circles of the magical world, like many unaffiliated half-bloods or witches. But your parentage has been verified by blood. Your lineage concludes in you. The boy nodded slowly. He had expected this. Blood did not bring wealth. Only legacy. And power, if he knew where to look. The silence in the inheritance chamber was thick. The parchment had already revealed the gist. There was no fortune, but there was lineage. There was no surname that resonated with glory, except one. Gaunt Aurelian stared at the line etched in gold ink. Recognized ancestral lines, Gaunt family, last living legitimate heir. The name was not clean. It was tainted by madness, fanaticism, decadence. But it was a magical, ancient, profound name. And most important, it wasn't Riddle. For years he had carried that surname like an unavoidable mark. A shadow. Sometimes a condemnation. Sometimes a motivation. But now he had a chance to choose who he wanted to be. For the first time, he felt divided. He turned to Stinky, who was watching him silently by the wall. What would my mother have thought, if he decided to name me Aurelian Gaunt? He asked him. The elf blinked. He moved a little closer, as if the question had pulled him out of a distant memory. Your mother loved your father. But she never let herself be blinded by his darkness. She wanted you to be free to decide which part of yourself you wanted to carry with pride. If you chose the Gaunt surname, I don't think she would be angry. Rather, I think she would hug you tighter. And she would say, make it your own. Fix what others have broken. Make it new. Aurelian looked down. The name Riddle sounded like an alien prophecy. Gaunt, on the other hand, sounded like defiance. Then that's what I'll do, he whispered. I'll be Aurelian Gaunt. Stinky nodded respectfully. A name that can be scary, or hopeful. You decide which it will be. Aurelian turned to the goblin, decision clear in his eyes. I wish to register my magical identity as Aurelian Gaunt. Let all records linked to my lineage be updated. The goblin nodded with the solemnity befitting an ancestral act. It shall be done. As of today, Gringotts will recognize him as the last legitimate heir of House Gaunt. Since you have claimed your lineage, you are entitled to bear a magical seal of family identification. The goblin opened a compartment under the table and extracted a small black wooden box with brass hinges. Opening it, Aurelian saw an opaque silver ring, smooth and cold, with a freshly made engraving, a snake coiled over an upright eye, and under it, the name, Aurelian Gaunt. This is not the original family ring, clarified the goblin. The real Gaunt ring, also known as the seal of the old blood, was reported lost decades ago. The last to possess it was his father, Tom Marvolo Riddle. Lost, he said with false curiosity. It disappeared after his rise and fall. Some say it was destroyed, others that it is hidden. But until it is recovered, this ring forged by Gringotts will serve as legitimate identification to any magical institution in the world. It is magically linked to your blood. Only you may wear it. The goblin offered it to him with both hands. Aurelian took it without a word, held it for an instant, feeling the symbolic weight of the metal, and then slipped it onto his right finger. The silver adjusted instantly, as if recognizing the lineage. Welcome officially, Mr. Gaunt, said the goblin with a slight bow. The lineage has a name again. Stinky watched him from the wall with shining eyes. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Aurelian clenched his fist slowly and felt the cold firmness of the ring against his skin. He was no longer anyone's son. He was now the founder of himself. While the goblin finished sealing the lineage records, Aurelian stared at the empty box that had contained his new ring. There was something still nagging at the back of his mind. Do I have any property on record? He asked with an inquisitive tone. Land, houses, ruins, whatever. The goblin raised an eyebrow and flipped through a secondary parchment with legal seals on it. "Let's see," he murmured as a gaunt heir. "You have rights to an ancestral property known as the Gaunt Cabin, located on the outskirts of Little Hangleton." "The same cabin where my ancestors lived," interrupted Aurelian. "Correct. The site has been abandoned for decades. It's listed as a collapsed structure with no active protections. No one has claimed it, until now. Any property in the Riddle name?" The goblin paused, cocked his head to one side. "Technically, Riddle Manor, though it's not registered in his name, as it belonged to the Muggle Riddle family. However, under certain old ministry agreements about magical inheritances with crossed lines, you could file for ownership if you prove linkage and if the land remains without a rightful owner. That property is also in Little Hangleton. So, they're both in the same town." "That's right. Two ruins facing each other, with a blood-stained history between them." Aurelian nodded slowly. There was no visible emotion on his face, but his thoughts were already projecting further. He let the silence hover for a few seconds, then, in a calm, precise voice, asked the question that would mark his next big move: "Does Gringotts offer services to manage investments?" The goblin did not smile. But his eyes sparkled with the exact reflection of what Aurelian had planted in that word. "Of course," he said, and a slow smile formed on his face. "As long as the gold is willing, Gringotts knows how to make it grow." He didn't reply. He just nodded once. Chapter 8 The value of an idea. The word had been accurately thrown around: investments. And the goblin, Krivix as he had introduced himself shortly thereafter, caught his like an ancient predator hungry for metal and opportunity. "An unusual request," he said, crossing his long fingers over the desk, "especially coming from someone so young." "And that's a problem," replied Aurelian calmly, without a trace of insecurity. "No. It's a warning." Krivix got up and went to a side shelf where he opened a small chest with brass latches. He took out a document bound in dark green leather and placed it on the desk. The title, in gold lettering that changed softly in the light, read: Investment, Management and Acquisition Systems, Gringotts Private Division. Gringotts has centuries of experience managing fortunes, assets, business alliances, even magical properties spread across the globe, the elf explained as he opened the book to a section marked with a red ribbon. "We offer private accounts, fake legal figures for discrete investments, magical contract protection, independent audits, everything needed to keep the gold flowing, without the names making noise." Aurelian flipped through the pages without touching, only with his eyes. "And do they also manage investments for young men with no history or title, except one that perhaps everyone would rather forget?" "Ancient blood carries more weight than surname," Krivix replied without hesitation. "The Gaunt name is not loved, but it is respected. And now, it has a face again." Aurelian was silent for a moment, thinking over his next words. "I have a starting capital of about 20,000 galleons," he said finally. "I haven't made any major decisions yet. But I want to start moving them intelligently. Study the market. Identify stores with potential. Create alliances under a discrete figure. No bragging. All of that is possible," Krivix stated. "We can create an alternate business identity for you, a firm protected by ancestral magic that will answer only to your blood. In addition, you can authorize magical agents, we call them legal ghosts. They are responsible for making investments on your behalf in magical markets and in some cases, even Muggle ones if you wish." Aurelian narrowed his eyes. "And all under Gringotts' control?" "Under Gringotts' supervision, yes. But always with his direct approval. No one moves a single galleon without his magically signed order." Aurelian thought about the vault he had just claimed. He knew there was no gold or gems in there, but there was something more important, the symbol of a beginning. "Then I want to make you an offer, Krivix," he said, his tone as serious as an adult speaking among equals. "You know the magical economy better than anyone. You have seen my lineage, my intentions, and my name. So I ask you, do you want to be the steward of the Gaunt Vault?" Krivix raised an eyebrow. His face, almost always unperturbed, showed a hint of genuine surprise. And then, a slow, sharp smile, like an edge coming out of a sheath. "That's not a common offer." "Nor am I a common figure," replied Aurelian without arrogance, "only certainty I can learn fast, but I need an ally who knows his way around this world better than I do, for now." Krivix studied him silently, then spoke in that voice that combined diplomacy with financial instinct. "Managing a vault linked to an ancestral family with dark legacies, is not something an goblin would do out of politeness." Aurelian kept his gaze steady. "What is your price?" Krivix narrowed his eyes. 5% of the net profits generated by any investment transaction, whether it is in the magical or muggle world. Nothing more. Nothing less. The boy thought for a few seconds. He did a quick calculation in his mind, not just of money, but of strategic value. And he nodded. "I accept." Krivix extended a thin, bony hand, with nails sharp as onyx. Aurelian shook it. And so was sealed the first deal of what would be a new era for House Gaunt. Krivix waved his hand gracefully, and a file cabinet floated to the desk. As he opened it, multiple documents began to unfold like enchanted wings. Each sheet contained coded information about stores in Diagon Alley, the Night Emporium, and even international markets. "As a new investor client, you are entitled to access the Gringotts Internal Business Opportunities Bulletin," said the goblin as he rearranged the papers with surgical precision. "Here you will find reports on stores with expansion potential, failing businesses with valuable assets, or markets not yet saturated. Many wizards don't understand the value of what they have, until it's all gone." Aurelian read names of small rope stores, makers of handcrafted cauldrons, distributors of potion ingredients in Hogsmeade Village, and even an old magical bookstore in Paris that was on the verge of closing for lack of heirs. "Which of these sectors has the most turnover?" he asked without looking away. "Potions and brooms," Krivix answered immediately, "though potions have small margins if you don't control production, distribution, and permissions. Brooms are another game. They require investment in development, but they generate brand loyalty and international visibility, especially in the sports arena." Aurelian looked up. "Tell me about the brooms. The most relevant companies." Krivix nodded and pulled out a small, specific dossier. "Currently, the market is dominated by 3 main manufacturers. Comets, Comet Trading Company, Antique. Traditionalists. Manufacture reliable and economical models. Famous for the Comet 260, popular among students. They don't innovate much, but have a global presence. Nimbus Brooms, Nimbus Racing Broom Company, young company, but on a meteoric rise. The Nimbus 1500 model has just been launched and has revolutionized the market with its speed and maneuverability. Rumor has it that they are working on a new, even faster broom for 1990. Clean Sweep, very popular with Quidditch teams. Focused on sport brooms with competitive balance. The Clean Sweep 7 is their current flagship model." "And is there room for new actors?" asked Aurelian. "Right now, not many people think so. But if someone manages to make a model that is safer, faster or stronger than what's current, or introduce a truly innovative design element, they can grab a share of the market. Especially if they target the youth or professional sector." Aurelian pondered silently. The concept of aerodynamic design, the use of strong muggle materials like carbon fiber, or even magical stabilization mechanisms, ideas were beginning to swirl. "You could acquire silent participation in Nimbus or Clean Sweep," Krivix added, "or you could also buy smaller workshops and turn them into a division of your own." Aurelian looked down at the report. He would not make hasty decisions. But he could already see it clearly, there was room to make history in the air. "And is there anyone who controls the broom distribution market?" "Not formally. Each manufacturer is in charge of its own chain, although some use distributors in local markets. A weak link, that can be used to advantage." Aurelian nodded, as a new word slowly formed in his mind: Gaunt brooms. But he wouldn't write it down yet. Not yet. Krivix closed the last scroll and secured it with a Gringotts seal that burned faintly with financial magic. If you are content, we will sign the contracts and I will officially begin acting as your investment representative and account manager. Aurelian nodded without hesitation. Do it. The goblin pulled out a silver stiletto enchanted with a ruby core. A small incision, a drop of blood on the contract, and the ancestral seal of Gringotts glowed brightly for a few seconds before fading. From now on, Krivix said, stowing the documents in a runic-locked chest, any financial transactions, acquisitions, diversification, or asset management linked to the Gaunt Vault will be handled exclusively under my stewardship, with direct approval from you. Aurelian allowed himself a small smile. Perfect. I want you to set 15,000 galleons in motion. Keep them in a separate compartment inside the vault and start working with them as a primary investment fund. Discreetly. Nothing visible yet. Krivix inclined his head, satisfied. As you wish, Mr. Gaunt. Both your gold, and your vision, are already in place. Later that day, Aurelian was walking down Diagon Alley in a simple, second-hand tunic, no embroidery, no crest. The goal was clear, to go unnoticed. No one was to see the Gaunt heir, much less link him to financial movements or market research. Stinky followed him at a distance, disguised as an elf beggar, but with his eyes wide open. Always alert. Aurelian stopped in front of one of the oldest stores in the alley, Flintwick's Brooms and Flight Gear. A carved wooden sign showed brooms floating gently under a suspension enchantment. 3 models were displayed in the window, Clean Sweep 7, elegant and understated. Comet 260, practical and affordable. Nimbus 1500, shiny, aerodynamic, with small silver runes on the handle. It went in quietly. The smell of varnish, treated leather, and magic dust enveloped him. A couple of customers were talking to a clerk about replacing the bristles on a broom damaged by hail during a school game. Aurelian did not interrupt. He just observed. The distribution, the clientele, the weak points, high prices, few methods of personalization, no attention for children or magically disabled customers. Lack of segmentation. More attractive designs and real magical differentiation, he thought. He grabbed a flight catalog and walked out inconspicuously. Outside, Stinky waited for him discreetly under an enchanted lamppost. Did you see everything, young master? Enough, murmured Aurelian. The market is old. It is well positioned, but asleep. It fears no competition. That makes it weak. The gate creaked softly as it closed. Aurelian entered the orphanage almost unseen, but not fast enough to prevent Mrs. Hargrove, the night manager, from detecting him with her voice sharp as a cutting spell of silence. Riddle. Do you think it's time to go back? It's past 7 o'clock. Aurelian lowered his head, taking in the scolding with studied resignation. The rules were strict, departures had to be brief and justified. I stayed reading in the library. I didn't see the time. That's what you always say. You think because you have good grades you can do whatever you want. No, no ma'am. She snorted and jotted something down in her checkbook. Then he waved her off to his bedroom. He didn't insist. She didn't need to. That night, like many others before, Aurelian locked himself under the covers with his magic light lit by his fingers, softly as a lamp. He unfolded a sheet of parchment and an old leather-bound notebook he had bought for 2 sickles. Inside, amid scattered sketches and notations, he began to trace what might become the real thing. Flying broom, Project A1G goal, maximum speed and maneuverability without sacrificing stability. Target audience, professional players/elite pilots. Inspired by the principles of aerodynamics he remembered from his past life, and what he knew of the still non-existent Fire Sita, Aurelian began to write down the essentials, individually calibrated magic bristles with floating ebony core. Spruce handle reinforced with runic fiber, proprietary theory. Intelligent height adjustment system with micro-level settings. Secondary core for reactive magic stability. Activation with magic fingerprint recognition, experimental prototype. Power without control is an accident. Control without power is boring. Every night for weeks, he refined the concept. He even tried basic incantations on loose branches he stole from the yard, testing for buoyancy, vibration, and directionality. Nothing flew yet, but the important thing was theory. Aurelian understood something that most magical inventors of the time did not grasp: magic could follow rules, if given the right form. Underscore 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 one cloudy afternoon in early April, while reviewing a book on magical strength of materials, a grey owl burst through the common dining room window and landed on her empty plate. No one else paid attention. The bird dropped a letter with the unmistakable Gringotts seal. Aurelian broke the seal. "Mr. Gaunt, your presence is required at Gringotts at your earliest convenience. Subject: investment progress. Private room 13, Krivix. GG." He smiled slightly. Something had moved. Something was already bearing fruit. He rose from the table, with the same silent air as always. Only he knew that underneath that patched school robe, an empire was growing. Chapter 9, Chapter 9 Decisions. Private room 13 was small, windowless and silent as a tomb, but it radiated the same feeling as a secret vault, latent power. Krivix was already waiting for him, with 2 scrolls on the table and a smile barely visible on his impassive expression. "Lord Gaunt," he greeted with a brief bow, "I have begun work on the 15,000 galleons as per your instruction. The first fruits are already sprouting." Aurelian sat down bluntly, with a mixture of expectation and control. "Where have you invested?" he asked. The goblin extended the first scroll. 5,000 galleons were earmarked for a silent stake in Nimbus Racing Broom Company. We were able to gain access to a small fraction of shares through a wizard intermediary acting under a protected identity. The company has just launched its 1500 model and is in development of the 1700, the prototype of which has already begun internal testing. They are capturing the elite sector. It's the most aggressive move with near-term potential. Aurelian nodded, pleased. He had already considered it as a possibility. "And the other 10,000? "I diversified into 3 channels," Krivix replied, "suppliers of ingredients for basic potions in rural markets. Margins are small, but stable, and contracts with local stores ensure steady flow. A dilapidated magical bookstore in Paris, which was acquired under an alternative legal form. It has high-value books that could be restored and resold for twice their initial price. We have already contacted 2 buyers. An enchanted tunic store in Scotland with spells that adapt to the ambient temperature. Its owner was in debt and agreed to a partial merger. She is innovative, but not very business-savvy. Gringotts will oversee operations." Aurelian ran his eyes over the scrolls. The numbers were solid. Every line made sense. "Good work," he said at last. "Thank you," Krivix replied, though it sounded more like a constatation than gratitude. There was a brief silence. Aurelian broke it calmly. "I want us to invest what is left of the capital, in a riskier sector. But with the possibility of multiplying the investment tenfold or more." Krivix cocked his head. "I'm listening." Aurelian leaned forward slightly. His voice lowered, though not out of fear, but out of precision. "I want you to invest in a Finnish Muggle company. Still small, but with structure, technology, and an immense future. It's called Nokia." The name seemed to float in the air. "What does it produce?" Krivix questioned. "Currently lumber, tires, industrial equipment, but they are already getting into telecommunications. By 1990 they'll be in the cell phone business. By then, everyone will want a device to talk wirelessly. And they'll be ready. Krivix watched him silently for several seconds. Finally, he spoke softly. That's a very accurate prediction. Aurelian held his gaze. It's not a prediction. It's a well-informed intuition. The elf unfolded the parchment again and made a note. We can set up an untraceable investment fund in the Muggle stock market sector, with coverage in Nordic companies. It will require very delicate magic and a specialist contact in Helsinki. But it can be done. Do it, said Aurelian. Don't put in all the remainder. Just enough to plant the seed. 5,000 galleons. Exactly. Krivix closed the parchment with a black ribbon. I've met many heirs. Some squander their fortune. Others bury it out of fear. But you want to dominate the market. Aurelian stood up. His eyes showed neither arrogance nor elation. Only vision. I don't want the market, Krivix, I want your respect. And without another word, he left the room as calmly as he had arrived. Behind him, Krivix smiled for the first time. There was something fascinating about that boy. And it wasn't his last name, it was his mentality. Underscore 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 numbers spoke before words. Nimbus is up 12% in internal shares since our involvement, Krivix announced as he displayed a floating graph with rising gold lines. The company has begun trials with its 1700 model and has signed agreements with 2 professional Quidditch teams in Ireland and Germany. Our investment is already producing return. Aurelian showed no elation. He just nodded. And the Paris bookstore? The inventory was restored. We sold 4 rare volumes to a collector in Prague for 3 times their initial value. The rest are being catalogued. One of the books possesses living binding magic, it has not yet been opened. Keep it sealed. We'll see later. As for Nokia, the operation was completed. We transferred funds through a network of magically controlled Muggle loan sharks. We own a silent minority stake. At the moment, it does not arouse suspicion. Perfect, said Aurelian, sounding proud. Krivix narrowed his eyes, appraising. Few people at your age would understand the importance of diversifying between worlds. You plan for the long term. There is no other way to play this game, Aurelian replied. The months that followed were a whirlwind of work. During the nights, while the rest of the orphanage slept, Aurelian perfected his experimental incantations. He sought not to copy what already existed, but to create what had not yet been imagined. Theory 59 was now complete. The principle of controlled magical saturation had opened up new ways of channeling energy, and although physically demanding, Aurelian could now activate small areas of intensified magical flow at will. He used it as an extension of his instinct, magic that responded to thought, not just gesture or word. In parallel, he was still working on his most ambitious project, a truly new magical broom. He had no working prototypes yet, but he had created several conceptual designs that combined Muggle aerodynamics, magical channeling channels, and power steering runes. He was testing them with modified branches, just to understand the physics and balance. The sun of July 5 filtered through the orphanage window like a silent blessing. Aurelian, dressed in a new tunic, discreet, dark grey, with an enchanted brooch that Krivix had sent him as a sign of trust, he went out quietly. Mrs. Hargrove hardly noticed him. Most of the children were unaware that it was her birthday that day. He preferred it that way. Stinky was waiting for him in an alley 3 blocks away. He greeted him with a brief, proud bow. To the bank, young master. Aurelian nodded. Yes. Today is an important day. Together they headed for Gringotts. The temperature inside Gringotts was always the same, cold, silent, and charged with a subtle tension. Aurelian enjoyed it. It reminded him that every stone, every goblin, and every underground passageway, was meant for one thing only, to protect what it was worth. A lesser goblin guided him to private room 13, where Krivix was already waiting for him, standing, with 3 documents spread out on a runic onyx table and a small locked box on the right side. Seeing him enter, the elf greeted him with a slight nod. "Mr. Gaunt. Welcome. And happy birthday." Aurelian raised an eyebrow in surprise. He hadn't mentioned it at any point. Krivix caught his expression and smiled slightly. Gringotts doesn't ignore any relevant data about its customers, especially when they have a birthday. "Thank you," replied Aurelian in a neutral voice. "It has been 8 months since we began the first stage of operations," continued Krivix, opening the first scroll. "I am pleased to inform you that the investment portfolio has exceeded our projections." The elf projected a set of floating figures into the air, with animated golden bars. The initial investment was 15,000 galleons. As of today, after movements in Nimbus, Parisian bookstore, ingredient distribution, and the covered stake in Nokia, the total consolidated capital stands at 22,340 galleons. Aurelian nodded, satisfied. "A profit of over 7,000 galleons in 6 months, he said, crossing his arms. "Not bad for a start." "Correct. Nimbus has been the main driver, followed by Nokia, which is up quietly after an industrial tender in Northern Europe. The Scottish retailer has regained solvency and is expanding. The bookstore, still awaiting its second sales cycle. And the expected margins for the end of the year. If trends hold and we execute the planned secondary strategies, we could reach 30,000 galleons by December. Even more if Nokia enters the digital market as anticipated." Krivix paused and pushed toward Aurelian the small dark wooden box. "A symbolic present. Not from Gringotts, but from me. For your birthday and for your way of doing business." Aurelian opened the box cautiously. Inside, rested a magic fountain pen, forged from polished thestral bone, with inscriptions of enchanted ink that only appeared under the light of the wand. On its side, a single word, Visio. Infinite ink, resistant to fire, water and tracking. Use it well. Aurelian closed the box carefully. He had learned to distinguish a valuable gesture when he saw one. "Thank you, Krivix. I will," he replied with genuine happiness. The elf nodded, needing no additional words. Krivix was picking up the scrolls when Aurelian spoke again, this time in a tone that sought not approval, but execution. "I want to increase our investment in Nokia." The elf looked at him with interest. "The reason?" "They have begun experimenting with mobile telecommunications. The signs are clear, and their operating model is about to break the traditional production cycle. By the end of the decade, they will dominate the market on at least 3 continents. We need to expand the position while they have not yet become visible to others." Krivix folded his arms, assessing. "How much do you wish to invest?" "Another 5,000 galleons. Quietly. And if possible, with preferential access in the next rounds of expansion." The goblin smiled. Not out of politeness, but because he enjoyed it. "Done. I will proceed with the move later this week." Aurelian then pulled a rolled leather tube from his tunic and deposited it on the table. "And this is something I also want to set in motion. Not as an outside investment, but as my own brand." Krivix raised an eyebrow before unwrapping the plans. What he found inside was no childish scribble, no makeshift schematic. They were technical drawings, carefully annotated, with references to magical and muggle materials, float lines, weight distribution, magical stabilizers, and a runic pulse acceleration system the elf had never seen on modern brooms. Aurelian pointed to a portion of the blueprint. Inspired by muggle aviation designs, but adapted to magical channels. The handle would have an outer layer of dark spruce, but reinforced internally with magical filaments and a core that responds to the user's magical imprint. The bristles would be floating, not physical, except in the initial test model. Total stability, adjustable speed, intelligent response. Krivix scoured the lines with the sharp eyes of one who sniffs for gold. "This doesn't exist yet." "I know. That's why I want to do it. But not as an amateur inventor. I want to set up a whole division. Brand, workshop, permits, testers. Everything. And I want you to help me set it up. The goblin looked at him, pondering. Creating a broom brand is a war. Nimbus and Cleansweep are titans. But he looked at the blueprint again. If what you propose works, it won't be a broom. It will be an aerial revolution. Exactly. Krivix extended a hand of slender fingers and filed claws. Then let's get started. I'll find a discreet workshop outside Wales or Norway. Loyal staff. And we'll need a name. Aurelian looked down at his plans. He thought for a second, and replied, Knockem. It will be the name of the line. Brief. Elegant. Deadly in the air. Krivix nodded slowly. Underscore 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 Krivix finished storing the plans for Knockem in an enchanted folder with a triple confidentiality seal. But before completely closing the meeting, he pulled out an additional small scroll. There is another matter you may be interested in, Mr. Gaunt. I have claimed the old Riddle Manor in your name. Aurelian looked up, curious. Was it difficult? Moderately. The property had been abandoned after previous incidents. It was not registered as active, but was still listed under properties indirectly linked to the Gaunt line through its progenitor. I used a lineage-linked possession clause to assume control. Aurelian reflected for a moment. Good. Begin the restoration. I want you to reinforce the entire structure with higher-level magical protections. I don't want to live there yet, but I will. When it's safe. Krivix noted without saying anything. I also researched the Gaunt Manor, as you requested. Magical law states that a direct heir can officially claim a blood title at age 17. However, the elf raised a claw. If that heir is the last of the bloodline and demonstrates sufficient magical mastery, he may initiate the process at age 14, under a lineage preservation clause. Aurelian nodded, processing. Then I am 5 years old. Correct. But I warn you, keeping this process hidden from the ministry will become increasingly complex. Your family name is now linked to vaults, land, and financial movements. We goblins can hide a lot. But if someone connects the dots and requests a magical audit, they will raise suspicion. Does it worry you? Yes. Because I can't file any report on the rebirth of House Gaunt without setting off a chain of political fallout. Then don't present it, said Aurelian without hesitation. Not yet. The Gaunt name will be reborn, yes, but when I decide, not before. If anything gives us away before the time, the surprise factor will be lost. Krivix smiled softly. Not with derision, but with approval. Sometimes I forget that I have a 9-year-old boy in front of me. And that not all goblins are as cunning as you. The silence between the two was brief, but full of understanding. 2 conspirators. 2 builders. 1 young, 1 old. Both playing a game. Chapter 10, Chapter 10 Stories of an Archmage. Dumbledore's point of view. The corridors of Hogwarts were quieter during the summer, but no less guarded. The stones knew how to keep secrets, and the castle, though old, never quite slept. Albus Dumbledore walked with the calm of one who has known every corner for decades, but with the attention of a sentinel. His robes, embroidered with constellations that slowly changed with the seasons, trailed silently on the marble floor. The headmaster's office, located at the top of an enchanted tower, was their refuge, their center of operations, and their prison. The office of Archmagus brought neither glory nor rest. It brought weight. A weight that grew with each year. Every morning started the same way. He went through 3 types of correspondence. Hogwarts business, exams, teachers, curriculum adjustments, magical protection, selection of students not registered by the ministry. International Council of High Magic, discussions of magical zones in crisis, tensions between imperial wizards in Asia, attempts to regulate the African runic trade. Global magical balance reports, fluctuations in ancient magic flows, spontaneous relic appearances, or events that suggested a disturbance of order. Today, one such report caught his attention. It came from Solomon Gray, Archmage of North America. Albus, Gringotts has recently mobilized resources linked to ancient lineages. The transactions are protected by goblin seals, but certain signatures match blood magic that has not been used for decades. Any movement on your turf? S.G. Dumbledore read the message with a barely frown. Gaunt. It was a surname he hadn't heard aloud in years. Since Tom Riddle's supposed death, the line had been dormant. Not extinct, but on hold. No known heirs. No sign of restoration. Until now. He rose from his chair and walked to the black stone fireplace. He held out his hand and a sky-blue flame ignited with a single word. He threw down a handful of runic dust and uttered in a low voice, Nermengard. The face that appeared in the fire was no longer so young. Gellert Grindelwald, confined deep within his own fortress, still retained a shrewd and alert look, even after decades of confinement. Albus, he said in a gruff but serene voice, is today a day of watching, or talking? Both, I'm afraid, Dumbledore replied. Something ancient is beginning to stir again. Something, linked to the Gaunt blood. Grindelwald cocked his head to one side. He did not laugh, but his lips curved in irony. The bloodline of the so-called Dark Lord, awakening again. I have no proof. Yet. Just, presences. Financial movements. Auras. Subtleties. And you fear it has not yet been the end of Voldemort? I fear not, said Dumbledore. I prepare. Grindelwald sighed. He looked away, as if he could see beyond the enchanted walls of his prison. I always thought chaos would return, not by those who caused it before, but by those who inherit its purpose without its hatred. Those are the truly dangerous ones. Dumbledore did not reply. But he made a mental note of every word. Later, returning to his desk, he opened an ancient book bound in kelpie leather. It was a genealogical compendium of pure magical lineages, magically updated every generation. He turned the pages carefully until he came to the letter G. And there it was. Under the broken branch of the last descendant of House Gaunt. A new line, no name. Just a date. A goblin signature. Dumbledore narrowed his eyes. So you're there. Still hidden. Still silent. But not for long. Dumbledore let the magical genealogy close on its own. The tome rustled softly as the pages returned to their place with delighted obedience. The newly seen mark, the branch sprouting as if the Gaunt blood had circulated again, was important, but still vague. Too clean. Too fresh. Too protected by elf magic. Not yet, he muttered. First the other thing. He spun on his heels and walked to a hidden section of his personal library. After muttering 3 words in an ancient dialect only archmages used, an entire shelf spun on itself, revealing the black leather tome named Sigillum Obscura, Global Registry of Latent Inheritances. It was part of a hidden system maintained in collaboration between Gringotts and the International Confederation of Wizards, overseen solely by archmages and lineage custodians. The book did not show all the inheritances in the world, only those that, because of their magical nature or deliberate omission, had not been officially reported. He opened the volume corresponding to the 1987 records. He went through it slowly. Lesser witches, extinct houses, disputed or sealed inheritances. Until a name stopped his hand. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Status, presumed dead. Recent notification, residual magical activation detected. Location, undetermined. Nature, fragmentary, not stable. Dumbledore's stomach tightened. Not out of surprise, but out of confirmation. He had expected something like this. Sooner or later. He extended his palm over the name and whispered, reveal magical origin. A floating rune lit upon the parchment. The magical aura was ancient, warped. The coordinates were veiled by some kind of dark interference. It was not a physical place. It was as if a disembodied intention had pulsed against the fabric of magical reality. It wasn't a comeback, muttered Dumbledore, it was an echo. He closed the volume slowly. Tom Riddle had sought immortality, not just as survival, but as permanence of his will. And some of that will was still present. Dumbledore walked over to the window of his office and looked north. The clouds seemed thicker that day. Cooler. First Voldemort. Then the Gaunts. And then, what? He couldn't put out all the fires. But he could anticipate where the major fire would start. Night had fallen completely over the headmaster's tower. The bluish flame of the fireplace glowed quietly as Dumbledore pulled out a parchment sealed with his personal crest, not that of Hogwarts, but of his status as Archmage of the United Kingdom. He picked up an enchanted quill and began to write an ancient, curved script. Newt, something has changed in the flows of the magical bloodline. I'm not certain yet, but there are traces that carry over from the Gaunt blood, and others that belong to someone who should never leave a trace again. I need you to be on the lookout for any disturbance in the echoes of creatures linked to dark magic or cursed relics. Especially those that react to soul fragments or ancient artifacts. As always, do not mention this to anyone. With affection and respect, Albus. He rolled up the parchment, sealed it with black wax and handed it to Fawkes, his phoenix, who was sleeping peacefully on his iron pole. A glance was all it took for the bird to awaken, look at him and nod. In a second, Fawkes disappeared in a golden blaze heading south. He was alone. And in that silence, Dumbledore finally allowed himself to think about that night. The night that still hung heavy over the magical world. October 31, 1981. Tom Riddle had burst into Godric's Valley like a god ready to claim his place. Terrifying, unstoppable, convinced of his supremacy, and armed with a common wand, but charged with the will of a man who believed he could not die. And yet, he fell. He fell to the oldest, purest magic, most misunderstood by modern wizards, sacrifice. Lily Potter, in laying down her life for her son, wove an ancient enchantment that no book ever recorded. A living protection, rooted in love. Then, in that perfect instant of light and chaos, the baby survived, and the Dark Lord was reduced to dust, to echo, to a disembodied shadow. Harry Potter. Dumbledore repeated the name like a prayer, not for the boy himself, but for what it represented. The symbol that even in times of darkness, an unexpected light could emerge from where no one was looking. The night was advancing. Dumbledore walked slowly through the invisible gardens of the Astral Tower, a hidden extension of his office, protected by enchantments so ancient that only he remembered how to invoke them. The sky up there was clearer, as if the castle itself filtered the stars for the eyes of the wise. It was there that she allowed the memories to come back, one after another. The decision to leave Harry Potter with his aunt. Many had questioned it. Even Minerva, her voice trembling and her face full of indignation, had asked him how he could leave a child in a house where he would be shunned. But Dumbledore knew. As long as he lives under Petunia Dursley's roof. He whispered into the void, his mother's blood will protect him. Ancient magic, more powerful than any modern incantation, lived in blood ties. And that sacrifice Lily's was to be anchored to something tangible. A home. A family. Imperfect as it was. She knew Harry would suffer there. That he would grow up a stranger in his own blood. But he also knew he would survive. And that would be the first step. From that night in 1981 until now, much had changed. 1982, the Ministry of Magic initiated Operation Clean Sweep, eliminating the last active followers of Voldemort. Some Death Eaters hid under false names. Others were cleared with influence. The weakened Wizengamot began to rely more on the International Wizarding Council and the judgment of the Archmages. 1983, ancient magical relics were discovered in Eastern Europe. In Albania, at least 3 incidents of creatures reacting to the trace of residual dark magic were recorded. Dumbledore began to suspect that Tom Riddle's soul had not entirely disappeared. 1984, in Asia, Archmage Ren Yao detected anomalous migrations of celestial dragons and displacements of spirit guardians. The Japanese ministry requested international assistance after finding an active magical obelisk of unknown origin. An arcane communication network was established among the archmages, focused on monitoring the global magical balance. 1985, in Africa, Archmage Nala Mtekai reported the reopening of magical rifts sealed since the pre-colonial era. An artifact found in Egypt triggered a spontaneous magical storm in the Upper Nile. Archmage Anayan of the Flame reported magical earthquakes in the southern Enchanted Mountain Range, a harbinger of an ancient awakening. 1986, in North America, Solomon Gray reported the spontaneous reactivation of tribal magic pacts. A runic shrine disappeared without trace near the Great Lakes after an energy burst. In Eastern Europe, a lineage claim caused magical unrest around the defunct House Zmijok. 1987 to late August, several claims of dormant magical inheritances occurred in continental Europe, generating movement in the vaults of Gringotts. Archmage Kazimir Volyov, from Russia, warned of the partial collapse of an ancestral blood containment seal. In the UK, the magical balance shows signs of fracturing, although it is not yet known in which direction it will break. All in less than 6 years. Dumbledore narrowed his eyes. We have had no peace, only a pause. He knew the child of prophecy was growing up, sheltered, ignorant of his legacy. But something else was growing as well. And when they were ready, history would reignite. Chapter 11, Chapter 11 Echoes of Darkness. The last months of the year slipped by like scrolls under an enchanted feather. December brought with it a constant cold that seeped even through the stones of the orphanage, but Aurelian endured it with the same resilience he had cultivated in his daily training. On the outside, his routine seemed no different from that of any other child. On the inside, every moment was part of a plan. During the day, he performed the tasks assigned by Mrs. Hargrove without question, helped the younger children, and maintained a neutral attitude that allowed him to go unnoticed. But in the evenings, as the building fell silent, his real life began. Under the protection of a soundproofing incantation he had designed himself, Aurelian trained with iron discipline, magical projections, emotional control, and above all, the advanced application of his masterpiece, Theory 59. It was no longer a theory. It was a reality. It functioned as a passive barrier, an envelope of enchanted energy that slowed down anything that tried to reach it. Any projectile, spell, or even a thrown object, began to slow down as it approached his body, until it came to a complete stop a few inches from his skin. He did not need to consciously activate it, his magic responded instinctively, shaped by weeks of precise refinement. It was, in essence, an application of space controlled by a magical resistance. The principles were his own. The result, otherworldly. Aurelian couldn't help but smile every time a small nail floated, suspended, before his face without touching it. Every 2 weeks, Stinky would appear promptly to escort him, discreetly and under well-traced allusions to Diagon Alley. There, Aurelian would visit antique bookstores, magical component stores and a small broom shop where he would quietly take notes. Although his broom project was still only a series of designs and sketches, each visit provided him with valuable technical details. He carefully observed the materials they used, the internal structure of modern models, and analyzed their defects with an engineer's mentality. He knew that the manufacturers relied on traditional methods, but he was already thinking of adaptations with Muggle alloys, stabilizing magic channels, and compact runes that no one had yet tried to combine. Meanwhile, his investments continued to bear fruit. Every month he received an owl from Gringotts with a financial report written by Krivix, his vault manager and now his main ally. The goblin summarized key movements, emerging opportunities, and suggestions for reinvestment. The numbers were solid. Even the investment in the Mughal company Nokia was beginning to show signs of expansion in Northern Europe. One evening in late November, Aurelian walked with Stinky in the light snow to a side bench in Cauldron Square, where businesses were already closing and the fog hid faces. The elf offered him an extra cloak, but he declined. "Sometimes I need to feel the cold," he said. "It reminds me that I still have a body I need to toughen up." Stinky looked at him in silent admiration. He knew his young master was different, not because of his blood, but because of his will. "Is something troubling you, young Aurelian?" "No," replied the boy, eyeing a wand store across the alley, "but I have a feeling that next year is going to be decisive. I feel like everything I've prepared is about to start taking shape." The elf nodded, speechless. Aurelian looked down at his little black leather notebook and sketched a new design variant for his broom, inspired by a bird of prey he had seen in a book on magical creatures. He had learned something in that year: power was not only what you had, but what you knew how to build in silence. And he, little by little, was building an invisible empire. Floated no body, no skin. Just fragments of consciousness, held together by will and hatred. But now, even that hatred was fading. In the ethereal vastness where his cursed soul took refuge, Tom Riddle, for that was how he felt again, had no company but his broken thoughts. Sometimes, he didn't even remember who he was. Or what he was. But other times, it all came back with brutal clarity. The orphanage. The cold walls, the distant screams, the stares of the caretakers who didn't know what to call him. The strange child. The one who did things without meaning to. The one who talked to snakes. The one who stole things just to feel that something belonged to him. "It wasn't evil," he whispered, "without lips, without voice. I just wanted something of mine." Hogwarts. His salvation and his damnation. The first time he was called by his name and not by a number. Where he learned he was special, and where he became convinced he couldn't be like everyone else. Tom Riddle, prefect, exemplary student, heir to Slytherin. Beloved by teachers, feared by his peers. And underneath it all alone. The promotion. Immortality. The control. The purge of the magical world. The Horcruxes. The fear of oblivion. He had erased his name to become eternal. But in that eternity that he himself created, he had become a shadow of himself. And now, he floated. No form, no flesh, no shadow. Only torn consciousness, shrouded in the mist of what once was. A broken soul. Fragmented. But still alive. Beyond time, beyond the body, Tom Riddle, for he could no longer hold the title of Lord Voldemort in this state, was only an echo. And like all echoes, he returned again and again to the same memories. In the midst of them all, one glowed with an intensity that would not fade. Elaine. It wasn't her name that hurt. It was what it provoked. A wound that never closed. A word that even now, in its spectral existence, made him tremble. She was not a follower. She was not a victim. It was a choice, her only weakness. His only chance. He knew her when he still allowed himself to walk among common wizards, covert, curious of the world. Elaine Harper was young, intense, dangerous in her freedom. She was the daughter of Muggles, and yet she never felt inferior. She had a raw, instinctive power, but also a worldview he didn't understand. What disturbed him most at the time, she understood him. She looked at him, not with fear or reverence, but with a kind of warm sadness. As if he knew that beneath the mask of the future Dark Lord there still remained something of that wounded child who had grown up unloved. "I don't think you're evil, Tom," she had said to him one night, by an enchanted fireplace. "I just think you're very, very lonely." He did not answer. He didn't know how. Because it was true. Because no one, ever, had used his name so gently. I hated her for it. And he loved her for the same. For months, he tried to push her away, to show her his cruelty. But she didn't run away. Not even when she witnessed what others called atrocities. Elaine saw beyond the horror, saw the child, not the monster. That tore him apart. Voldemort did not know when he began to love her. He did not understand. Love was weakness. Love was betrayal. Yet every time he looked at her, he felt something that even magic could not contain. A desire to stop. He had once offered her power. A place beside him. Elaine smiled sweetly and shook her head. You don't need someone to follow you, Tom. You need someone to stop you who understands you. Then he knew he couldn't have her. And so, one day, he lost her. It wasn't him who raised the wand. But it was his world, his war, his name that dragged her into the abyss. She died, giving birth. Giving life. That destroyed him. Because it was his fault. All of it. Now, floating in existence, surrounded by silence and shadow, Voldemort thought of her. In her laughter. In her stubborn gaze. In the way she touched his cheek when he allowed himself to close his eyes. In how, for an instant, she made him long to be more than eternal. To be loved. Elaine, you saw in me what even I couldn't see myself. If only he had chosen another path. If only he had had the courage to follow her instead of trying to dominate her. If I had renounced the fear disguised as ambition. Maybe I wouldn't be here. Maybe I would have a child. A family. A name that would instill not fear, but pride. Aurelian. The name echoed in the darkness of his consciousness like an ancient bell. The son he didn't hold. The legacy he didn't plan for, but could still be greater than he was. Protect him, Elaine. He thought, not knowing if his fragments would be heard in some corner of the soul. Protect him, from me. And then, in the silence, the crack spreads. Something had changed. The spectral consciousness that had once been Tom Riddle remained trapped between existence and nothingness. But after remembering Elaine, after reliving what he had felt, that irreparable loss, her warm presence, her steady voice, and that unrequited but undeniable love, he had opened a rift, not only in his present soul, but in all the fragments of his soul scattered across the world. That crack spread like a whisper through time and darkness. In Helga Hufflepuff's goblet, jealously guarded in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault at Gringotts, the gold seemed to tarnish for an instant, as if the object held a sigh that was not its own. On Rowena Ravenclaw's tiara, hidden in the debris of the Hall of Ministers, the air grew thicker, as if an invisible mist was taking over the place. In Slytherin's ancient locket, hidden in some sheltered and cursed corner, vibrated a magical dissonance, imperceptible to anyone, except those who listen with their souls. In Tom Riddle's diary, guarded by Lucius Malfoy in his mansion, the written words seemed to fade for a split second, as if the hatred enclosed in them wavered before something deeper. And in the gaunt hut, where the cursed ring rested among the ruins of the lost lineage, the dust stirred without the wind blowing. As if the dead remembered, as if the forgotten family name had begun to beat again. The Horcruxes, bound to Voldemort's soul, had felt something that had never existed in him before, regret. A tiny spark of humanity, powerful enough to travel between the threads that bound them together. A sadness so pure, so forgotten, that none of these fragments recognized it, but all felt it. A lament. An echo. An ancient pain. Voldemort's essence did not yet fully understand what it had felt, but the Horcruxes had heard it. It was at that very moment, that Aurelian Gaunt awoke with a fluttering heart, as if something far, far away, very ancient had touched his soul. Aurelian woke up suddenly. It wasn't a nightmare, or the noises of the orphanage, or even a rational premonition. It was an emotion. A sadness so pure, so alien and heartbreaking, that for a moment he didn't know if he was still dreaming or had been dragged into the depths of some memory that didn't belong to him. He slowly sat up in bed, his breathing labored. The room was dark, except for the faint moonlight that crept in between the curtains. There was no noise. Nothing unusual. But his chest, it hurt. Not physically. Like a pang. It was as if an invisible thread bound him to someone who had just lost everything. Aurelian put a hand to his heart. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. There it was again. An echo. Vague images, a fireplace, a female laughter, a male voice trembling inside. An unspoken love. An unbearable guilt. But the strangest thing was that it didn't feel like a threat. Aurelian knew the trail of hatred. He had studied it, confronted it, analyzed it. This was different. It was dark, yes. But not evil. It was tragic. He got up quietly, crossed the room without waking anyone, and lit a magic candle on his makeshift desk. He picked up his notebook, the one with his innermost thoughts. He wrote, "I have felt something tonight. A sadness so deep it almost made me cry, but it wasn't mine. It was not grief for its own sake. It was for loss. For love. For regret. I don't know who it was. But he was very lonely. As lonely as I ever was." He put down the pen and for the first time in a long time, he didn't train that early morning. He just sat by the window, watching the frost cover the glass. For some reason, which he could not understand, he thought of his mother, then, of his father. Whom he never knew. Whom he never thought to look for. And whom, in that instant, he felt like crying. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. The last year of anonymity. The mind was a battlefield. Silent, personal, invisible, but deadly. Not one of fire or crossed wands, but of hidden thoughts, sharp memories, and disguised emotions. Aurelian knew it. And he trained it with the same discipline with which a swordsman sharpens his blade every morning. In that new year, the year he would turn 10, training his mind became his main obsession to master the silent arts, occlumency and legerdemaincy. Night after night, while the other children in the orphanage slept, he sat upright on his bed, in complete silence. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. It was not meditation, it was mental construction. He erected internal barriers, impenetrable towers, labyrinths of illusions, deep lakes of encapsulated memories. Everything inside his mind. Each memory was carefully classified, as if they were rare books in an enchanted library. The most painful ones, locked in heavy chests. The most dangerous ones, covered with an invisible fire. At the center of it all, himself, watching himself from the outside. Occlumency offered him defense. Legerdemaincy, a door. Aurelian did not use the second one cruelly. He practiced it cautiously, learning to read gestures, expressions, tones of voice. Stinky, always attentive from the shadows, limited himself to observing. He didn't interrupt him, didn't comment, but his big eyes showed respect, and perhaps, a little concern. For Aurelian was not playing at being a wizard, he was forging himself to survive, to be better. However, it wasn't all internal struggle. On his days off, he would escape to Diagon Alley, like a whisper in the crowd. Sometimes to get new books, magical ingredients, or tools for his broom designs. But other times, just to feel that the world was not only shadows and blood. He would stop in front of shop windows filled with bubbling cauldrons and impossibly colored feathers. He listened to the wizards laugh, bargain, live. He indulged in luxuries no other child in the orphanage could imagine, a cinnamon ice cream and enchanted blackberries at Florian Fortescue's. A lemon cake that sparkled on the tongue. An enchanted stew that stirred itself and released bubbles of aroma that made you laugh. There, among that gentle chaos of everyday magic, Aurelian remembered that he was still a child. A different one, yes. One who trained like a wise old man. One who planned like an heir of centuries. But one who could still enjoy the sweet and absurd taste of a lollipop that whistled magical songs when he bit into it. But at the end of the day just a child. Those moments, when he walked leisurely along the enchanted cobblestones, he felt that maybe, just maybe, the world still had something beautiful to offer him. That day, Aurelian did not think about theories or strategies. He just wanted to rest. He had trained his mind and his magic for weeks without pause. Entire days immersed in deep occlumency exercises, mental rehearsals to improve his accuracy, complex readings on alchemy, and long periods of time perfecting his magical perception. He needed a break. For that, Diagon Alley was his ideal choice. There was something comforting in the sound of hurried footsteps on the enchanted streets, in the scent of sweets wafting out of the stores, in the animated voices of wizards and witches busy with their daily duties and lives. Sitting by the central fountain, with an ice cream of cinnamon and enchanted blackberries slowly melting between his fingers, Aurelian watched. Not watching. Just, listening to the world. Until he felt it. It wasn't a scream, or a spell. It was a change in the energy of the environment. An imbalance, as if the magic itself was asking for his help. He got up, leaving the ice cream halfway, walked in the direction of a little traveled side alley. Her steps were light, his face serene, but inside, his magic was awake, vibrating. There they were. Two girls about their age, in simple robes and frightened expressions, were backing up against a wall as two hooded men closed in on them. One already had his wand raised. The other was grinning with yellowed teeth. Aurelian didn't think about it. She raised a hand. Petrificus totalis, the spell departed from the center of his chest into his hand, channeled by sheer will. One of the men fell like a statue. The other spun around, surprised to see that his attacker was a child. But Aurelian was already advancing. His face showed no fear, only determination. Expelliarmus, the second fell to his knees as his wand went flying, bouncing off a wall of magic bricks. The girls stood still. One of them had a face dirty with tears and dirt. The other, her hair tangled and her lips pressed together as if she were holding back a scream. And then Aurelian smiled at them. It wasn't a big smile or a fake one. It was a faint gesture, kind, true. A spark of affection that asked for nothing in return. He reached into his robe and pulled out two small packets of singing candies. Their colors changed slowly, emitting soft chords that harmonized with the mood of the one who held them. Carefully, he offered them to her. One for each of them. The girls didn't speak. They couldn't. They looked at him with wide eyes, amazed. As if they didn't understand how someone could be so human. As if no one had ever offered them anything before without expecting something in return. When Aurelian was about to ask them if they needed help getting home, they disappeared. A gust of magical wind, a bluish flash. A transporter, Aurelian theorized. Aurelian slowly lowered his hand and looked into the empty air. The threat had passed. But something else remained in his chest, a strange feeling. Not just because of what he had saved, but because of what he had felt in the gaze of those girls. Loneliness. Like his own. He returned to his bench. The ice cream had melted. But he didn't care. Because, for a moment, he wasn't the hidden heir to a cursed line. Nor the kid who trained like a madman in secret. He was simply someone who did the right thing. And that tasted better to him than any ice cream. September 1988 came with a cold air, a light mist covered the magical rooftops of London. Aurelian, in grey robes and the bearing of one who felt at ease among secrets, walked down the steps of Gringotts. His appointment with Krivix was part of a routine that, for him, had moments of both practice and strategy. The private room smelled of enchanted leather and melted sealing wax. The goblin was already waiting for him with an open enchanted folder, surrounded by figures floating like golden constellations. "Welcome, Mr. Gaunt," greeted Krivix without preamble. "We have consolidated the latest information on your investments and assets." Aurelian sat calmly, folding his hands. I hear you. Your investments have been, in all honesty, exceptional. Nokia has shown unexpected growth even by Muggle standards. Profitability at Nimbus continues to rise, and we have successfully diversified into several magical sectors, rare ingredients, sporting brooms, and even premium potions for elite wizards. Krivix snapped his fingers, and a glowing figure emerged into the air. 142,670 galleons. Aurelian nodded without speaking. A glint of satisfaction crossed his eyes, but he did not allow himself the luxury of pride. And the manner? Krivix sat up slightly, adopting a more solemn tone. Riddle Manor has been restored in its entirety. But more importantly, it is protected with arch-magical grade defense enchantments. I have applied protocols that include invisible deterrent seals to all unauthorized wizards, even if they use tracking enchantments. Magical rebound barriers against offensive spells, curses, or forced appearance attempts. Time anchor seal, which prevents any manipulation of time within the grounds. A sensitive detection system that recognizes the magical signatures of those entering and leaving, linked directly to this master key. He held out a small ring of enchanted obsidian, which floated to Aurelian's palm. Able to resist an archmage, he said incredulously. Krivix flashed a dangerous smile. Only an archmage could breach. And even then, not without alerting Gringotts and you in advance. No protection is perfect, but this is on par with the great magical fiefdoms of the continent. Aurelian slowly turned the ring between his fingers. Well done, Krivix. I'm not moving in yet, but I want to visit soon. The goblin nodded. When you say, the manor will be ready. Aurelian leaned back a few inches, watching the floating figure in the air. 142,670 galleons. It was only the beginning. This will be the Gaunt legacy. He muttered to himself. Krivix, without needing to ask further, understood that Aurelian was not just talking about money, but something much bigger. The golden figure still hung in the air when Krivix, after a graceful hand gesture, dispelled it as if it were enchanted smoke. Now that your assets have exceeded 140,000 galleons, Mr. Gaunt, I believe the time has come to consider a new phase in your financial strategy. Aurelian narrowed his eyes, interested. What do you have in mind? Krivix unfolded a scroll. This one had a more rustic texture, with territorial seal markings. In its bottom corner glowed a small glyph of agri-magic record. Your current investments, particularly Nokia, have been visionary. Muggle capital has given you an unusual advantage. But even the strongest currents can change direction. It's time to diversify further. And I've managed to locate something interesting. Where? In the north of Scotland, in the Highlands. Also in an isolated magical region of Ireland. These are undervalued lands, with dormant ancient magical activity, abandoned after the European Magical War. But according to updated reports, its soil still possesses an ideal resonance for the cultivation of rare alchemical ingredients. Aurelian slowly sat up in the chair, eyes sparkling at the mention. Are we talking about mandrakes, third-grade valerian roots? And potentially pure-line wild wormwood, moon lily, and wildfire sap, if you enchant the fields well, Krivix added with a touch of enthusiasm. With the right care and discreet hires, we could establish an independent plantation that would allow you, in the future, to control some of the magical supply of certain advanced potions. Aurelian smiled sideways. Not just grow wealth, but control the key magic inputs. I'm interested. Do it. Krivix nodded. I will analyze both plots and present the best option for immediate acquisition. Of course, the identity of the buyer will be unrecognizable. Perfect. And regarding Nokia? Krivix turned another scroll. The Muggle Company's growth line was unmistakable. My recommendation, double or triple the investment now, before it opens to the wider international public. Allocate 20,000 more galleons to Nokia, ordered Aurelian. Make it one of our main columns. Done, smiled Krivix. The young wizard gazed silently out the window of the subway office, imagining not only galleons, but lands, ingredients, potions, and webs woven with time and vision. This, he murmured without taking his eyes off the distance, is only the beginning. Krivix silently nodded. For in his centuries working with magical families and forgotten fortunes, he had never seen someone so young project his legacy with such a balance of power, patience, and purpose. After the new investments were agreed upon, Aurelian looked down at the floating plains of Riddle Manor. From above, the property looked like an inconspicuous castle hidden among English fields. However, he now knew that it was armored with enchantments worthy of an ancestral fortress. Then, with the serenity of one who calculates every decision, he asked a question he had been holding back. Krivix, how much did the complete restoration of the mansion really cost? Including the magical protections, structural reinforcements, and the security systems you mentioned to me earlier. The goblin did not hesitate. He knew the time would come. The total amount comes to 500,000 galleons. Aurelian raised his eyebrows calmly, not looking surprised. He knew the defenses he'd had installed were not common, but he also didn't think they would border on the level of an armored magical fiefdom either. And how was it that we paid for it? Krivix smiled proudly. We didn't pay for it, at least not yet. I financed it through magical promissory notes with Gringotts, signed for 5 years. The rate is favorable, especially for a figure with your profile. Given the return on your assets, the projected growth in your investments will easily exceed that amount before the term expires. Aurelian did not respond immediately. He analyzed. He calculated. He felt the real weight of what he was building. You trusted me before I had a single legal ownership. He finally said. Why? Krivix looked him straight in the eye, unblinking. Because we goblins don't gamble. We only invest, when we've already seen the gold hidden beneath the surface. Aurelian smiled with genuine satisfaction. I'll make it worth your while, Krivix. I have no doubt about it, Mr. Gaunt. Underscore 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 underscore. The enchanted carriage descended the hill with a soft whisper, barely leaving a mark on the cobblestones of the old village. Aurelian looked out the window at the magical little village sleeping on the edge of oblivion, amidst the perpetual fog of Little Hangleton County. Nothing seemed to have changed since the last war. Narrow streets, floating lanterns, and stone houses with sloping roofs. Some with brooms leaning against the doors, others with cats watching from enchanted windows. The few wizards who saw him pass looked away, as if sensing that this carriage belonged to no ordinary person. Stinky, sitting in front of him, said not a word. His expression was solemn, as if every meter they advanced was a step towards a sacred ground. The carriage crossed a forest thick with weather-twisted trees and turned onto a path hidden behind a moss-covered wall. An enchanted iron gate opened with a faint green glow when it detected Aurelian's ring. Then, the carriage stopped. They had arrived. Before them stood Gaunt Manor. Nothing remained of the old, gloomy Riddle Manor. What stood now was a stately edifice, dark and elegant, with an air of grandeur and ancient magic. Its walls were of carved black stone, weather and fire resistant, with inlaid silver filigree forming parcel tongue glyphs that pulsed softly with a light of their own. At the main gate, flanking the great entrance arch, stood 2 colossal statues of basilisks. Their coiled bodies cast an imposing shadow over the threshold, their emerald eyes seemed alive. Each had a half-open mouth, as if they might awaken at any moment. Aurelian descended from the carriage in silence. The wind from the hill ruffled his hair. As he looked up, for an instant, he felt that the entire history of his lineage, both shame and glory, was summed up on that structure. He held out his hand. The obsidian ring he wore vibrated. A faint glow enveloped the gate. The mansion recognized him. The doors opened without a sound. Inside, the air was warm and slightly charged with magic. The main foyer was a soaring hall, supported by dark columns covered with inscriptions. Antique burgundy rugs stretched across a floor of burnished black marble. Torches hovered lit without real fire, casting a soft light that cast no shadows. The interior was magically expanded, Krivix had explained to him earlier. 10 times larger than it appeared on the outside. It boasted residential wings, library, training room, laboratories, hidden greenhouse, and more. All protected by goblin enchantments, ancient runes, and reinforced containment seals. They climbed the dark oak stairs, whose carved banisters depicted the evolution of the Gaunt lineage in arcane symbols. The main hallway was decorated with portraits of unknown wizards. Some murmured among themselves. Others simply watched silently, as if they knew to whom that house now belonged. Aurelian entered the central room, which would be his study. It had a huge fireplace, the ceiling was enchanted and showed the real sky, a semicircular library still empty, waiting for him. Here I will study. Here I will train. And here I will write my story, he said quietly. Stinky stood a few steps back, but couldn't help but let out a few discreet tears. Your mother, she would have wept with pride, Master Aurelian. The young man nodded softly, his expression calm. He did not smile. He only observed. Gaunt Manor was now his. Not as a trophy, but as a symbol of rebuilding and legacy. And though the house held echoes of the past, it also seemed to beat gently to the rhythm of the future. Chapter 13 Chapter 13 Names of the Eternal Scroll. The tallest tower of Hogwarts was shrouded in mist that morning. The gargoyles didn't speak. The windows did little to keep out the cold, yet Albus Dumbledore remained there, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the enchanted surface of the Book of Admissions. The dark leather cover breathed as if it were alive. It was, in a way, an ancient heart, beating with each generation. On the floating lectern, the book slowly opened by itself, guided by the castle's oldest magic. Each page, written in its own time over the centuries, recorded the names of the magical children born in the United Kingdom. Some names faded with time, others shone like promises. Dumbledore read in silence. 1989, he whispered, thus, another generation begins. Familiar names, mixed heritages, surprises born from unlikely unions. Pure magic, mixed magic, unexpected magic. Each with their own story to write, their virtues to discover, or their dangers to hide. Then his eyes stopped. Aurelian Gaunt. The name hadn't been used before. Not in any previous review. Not in the Muggle records, not in the Ministry's records. But there it was. Clear, written in golden magic ink on a new parchment. Recognized by Hogwarts. Accepted by the castle and its magic. Dumbledore frowned slightly. Not by surprise, but by a confirmed intuition. So, you finally show yourself, young descendant. He closed the book slowly. Not with fear. With respect. Because he knew that the return of that lineage was no coincidence. Not even an administrative error. It was part of the balance that the magical world, in its infinite wisdom, decided to restore. Deep in his heart, the Archmage Dumbledore knew that the course of the coming years had just veered in a new direction. The director's office was bathed in the soft morning light. An owl was spinning around in an enchanted cage, and the portrait of Brutus the Stammerer pretended to sleep in its frame above the fireplace. Albus Dumbledore gently closed the cover of the admissions book. Beside her, a cup of tea was cooling down, untouched. The door opened with a soft, enchanted whisper. "Did you ask to see me, Albus?" Minerva McGonagall entered with a firm stride, although her youthful and elegant bearing contrasted with the traditional image many had of her. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back, and she wore an emerald green robe with the Hogwarts emblem subtly embroidered in silver thread. "Thank you for coming, Minerva," Dumbledore said with a slight smile, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. She sat down without any preamble. "Is there anything we should be concerned about in this year's lists? I ask. Something has caught my attention," he replied, running his fingertip along the edge of the closed lid. A new name. One that wasn't listed until recently. McGonagall tilted her head, listening intently. Anyone with a meaningful surname. Aurelian Gaunt, he said softly. Minerva raised her eyebrows slightly. Not with surprise, but with understanding. The House of Gaunt. I thought it had died out. We all believed it. Until now. There was a moment of silence. They both knew what that surname implied. Is it ancient blood or just an inherited name? Minerva asked in a low voice. Hogwarts recognizes more than blood, Minerva, Dumbledore reminded her. It recognizes the deep connection with magic. The book doesn't lie. Aurelian has been accepted by the castle. McGonagall clasped her hands together in her lap. Do you think it could be a threat? I don't know yet. But what I do know is that someone with that lineage couldn't go unnoticed. She nodded slowly. Do you have any information about his whereabouts? Little. Very little, enough to know he wasn't raised by magicians. But it's not a lost cause either. Dumbledore slowly rose, walking towards a window overlooking the lake. He watched the trees reflected in the still water, as if searching for answers there. Minerva. I want you to be attentive when he arrives. Beyond the classes. Beyond discipline. Observe his heart. Not his last name. Professor McGonagall looked at him for a long time. Finally, he nodded. I will, Albus. Thank you, said Dumbledore, turning slightly. Some threads of fate are more subtle than they appear, and are not always dark because of the color of the thread, but because of what they weave with it. The meeting room for the heads of the household was lit by floating candles with a bluish light. The walls were covered in enchanted tapestries depicting scenes of the four houses working in harmony, snakes helping badgers, lions training with eagles. It was a place where Hogwarts' internal politics briefly took a back seat in favor of the common good. Albus Dumbledore was standing beside an oval oak table. Her deep indigo tunic parted at the waist, revealing a finely hand-woven scarf. His face, younger than many would remember decades later, still held the vibrancy of the years before the Second Wizarding War. His eyes, however, retained that weighty wisdom, as if they had spent centuries observing the flow of history. Seated across from him, Minerva McGonagall, elegant and focused, with her hair pulled back in an impeccable bun. His youthful face did not betray the steadfastness of his spirit. Phileas Flitwick, vivacious and curious, with dark, tousled black hair and enchanted spectacles that changed hue according to his mood. Pomona Sprout, fresh-faced, dressed in an earth-toned robe and a scarf of enchanted dried leaves that rustled in the breeze. And Severus Snape, the only one who seemed not to have changed over the years. His pale face, his black robe like the abyss, and his dark, unfathomable eyes retained the same intensity as always. Dumbledore placed a folder of parchment on the table, carefully tied with a red ribbon. Thank you for coming, he said calmly. There's something we need to discuss before the course starts this September. The four heads of the household exchanged glances. He's a new student, he continued. His name is Aurelian Gaunt. Snape frowned. Sprout swallowed. Flitwick tilted his head. McGonagall already knew this, but she still didn't let her guard down. Gaunt. Snape repeated in his drawling voice. I thought that family was extinct. We all believed it. But Hogwarts doesn't accept mistakes. The Book of Admissions has registered him. After a long investigation, I managed to recover some fragments of his past. Dumbledore opened the folder. It's not much information, but it's enough to begin. He was left at a Muggle orphanage shortly after birth, she said in a neutral voice. No one officially claimed custody. But its magic awoke very early. According to certain sealed records at Gringotts, his mother was a Muggle-born witch named Elaine Harper. Harper. Minerva repeated. The Ravenclaw who disappeared in the 70s. The same one, Dumbledore confirmed. A brilliant, sensitive witch, with a remarkable talent for charms and arithmancy. According to confidential goblin records, she died in 1978 after giving birth. There was a brief silence. "And the father?" Snape asked, his voice as firm and cold as usual. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment before answering. "There is no official record. But there are clues, coincidences in dates and residual magic in certain artifacts associated with his birth. Everything points to the father having been Tom Riddle. Or as he came to be known, Lord Voldemort." Those present became tense. Snape looked away. Pomona Sprout let out an involuntary sigh. Phileas Flitwick subtly adjusted himself in his seat. "It's not a statement," Dumbledore continued serenely, "but the possibility is there. That's why I brought it up for discussion. Because if it's true, then this child is not only the last Gaunt. He is also the heir to one of the darkest magicians of our era. The Gaunt blood is volatile, unstable, formerly powerful, but with a history of madness." "That will depend on the young man," Pomona said kindly. "We all have the opportunity to choose the kind of legacy we leave behind." Dumbledore nodded, pleased by the comment. "That's why I've called them together. When the boy arrives, I want us to observe him, but not condition him. He's brilliant, according to certain surveillance reports at Gringotts. Self-taught, precocious in wandless magic. But he's also young. He needs guidance. The important thing is not to let his origins define his destiny. It will be Hogwarts that shapes him. And we, who will guide him. Underscore 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 underscore. The sky over London was overcast, with clouds moving as if in a hurry to leave the city. Rain was threatening, but unwilling to fall. Aurelian Gaunt was sitting by his window in the orphanage. He held in his hands an old notebook where he had been perfecting, in magic ink, new spell schemes and arcane equations. Theory 59 no longer occupied his time so much, it was part of him now. Natural. Instinctive. A magical reflection between his body and the world. That morning, however, he felt restless. Not because of the magic. Not because of the orphanage. But because of the time. The calendar read July 5, 1989. His 11th birthday. And if everything happened as he foresaw as in the books of his former life, that letter was due to arrive today. An owl flew across the grey sky. Then another. Aurelian squinted, attentive. Every magical fibre in him was on alert. It wasn't more than 3 minutes before a large owl, with dark, shiny plumage, swooped down to perch gracefully above him. Her golden eyes watched him intelligently. The boy calmly stretched out his hand. The owl lifted one leg. Clutched in it was a thick parchment envelope, sealed with red wax. The Hogwarts crest with its 4 founding animals intertwined glittered in the dim daylight. He opened the envelope. Written in emerald green ink, in a firm, ancient handwriting, it read, "To Aurelian Gaunt, Room 12, Top Floor, St. Emmerich's Orphanage for Special Children, Kensington, London, UK." Aurelian held it between his fingers for a few seconds, without opening it. He felt it vibrate. Not physically, but through its magic. That envelope contained much more than just a letter. It was a key. A stepping stone to a new challenge. A reminder that her path, at last, advanced to the next rung. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Headmaster, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Archmagus, Supreme Head of the International Confederation of Wizards, Honorary Member of the Order of Merlin First Class. Dear Mr. Gaunt, we are honored to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The academic year will begin on September 1st. Enclosed with this letter is a detailed list of books and other items required for your first year of study. A representative of the school will be at your residence to guide you through the admission process and to answer any questions you or your guardian may have. If he or she is not available, you may send an owl to the Hogwarts office and a new visit time will be arranged. Please accept our most sincere congratulations. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress, Head of Gryffindor House. Aurelian lowered the parchment slowly. His heart was pounding, though his face barely showed a faint, thoughtful smile. He put the letter away carefully. He couldn't show it to anyone at the orphanage. They wouldn't understand. They never did. She stood up resolutely. Now she had to get ready for the next thing. As he dressed, he thought with genuine curiosity who would come looking for him. Would it be Professor Minerva McGonagall? Perhaps an eccentric professor, like Hagrid in the books of his old life? Or would it be Dumbledore himself, who seemed to have noticed him long ago? Whatever the case, he was ready. A week had passed since the arrival of the letter. Aurelian had read it dozens of times. He had memorized it. But he had not responded. He hadn't needed to. Because that day, the headmaster of Hogwarts himself knocked on the door of St. Emmerich's orphanage. The orphanage director, a woman with a dry voice and a nervous pulse, did not know how to react to that man with an impeccable purple robe, a bright gaze and a presence as calm as it was overwhelming. Aurelian, from the second floor, felt it before seeing him. An aura of ancient power, vast, but contained.